G'day guys, welcome to this live stream. Apologies for any technical difficulties we've experienced trying to get this thing set up. I'm good at a lot of things, and programs like YouTube and OBS and all this streaming software is definitely not one of them. So apologies in advance for anything like that. But yeah, welcome to the stream. So basically what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be going through a bunch of channel updates, really important and really exciting things happening on the YouTube front. I'm also going to be talking about the list that I'm running for an event next weekend called Radicalism. I'm going to talk about how I wrote the list, what the ideas are behind it, how the units all operate, that sort of stuff. And then I'm also going to share some advice, some general advice on list building, and talk about some of the different tools that I use to make sure that when I'm writing lists, I'm getting the best possible list that I can. And yeah, it should be really exciting. So if you've managed to join the stream, please comment, let me know. I've tried to make it so that I've got the comments displaying on the screen in front of me. However, like I said at the start, I'm far from tech savvy, so if you can let me know, that would be fantastic. I've also got it running down on my phone here, so I can always pull that up and update to try to get live comments there. So yeah, with that being said, I believe we are live. I've got a comment here from Greg saying Helldrake Alpha Strike, so fantastic. I can see that on the phone. I cannot see that on the screen though, which is disappointing, but you can't be good at everything, right? So yeah, you'll also notice I'm currently painting a Helldrake in front of me right here, so that's going to be keeping my hands busy and entertained whilst I chat to you guys about the various things that are coming down the pipeline for the channel and how we go about writing lists. So should be a really good conversation. Please feel free to chuck all your comments in there and I will do my best to answer them all. I'll try to answer every single one of them. However, if you really want your comment to be read and responded to, there's a little button there you can do called Super Thanks, which attaches a monetary donation to it. Even if you just do $1, that will help me make sure that I don't miss your comment, because if as the stream builds up and we get a whole bunch more people tuning in and comments flying, it's entirely likely that I'm going to miss some. So if you really want your comment to be read, even just $1, and I'll get to it. And because it flags, it brings it to the top, and it makes it a shitload easier for me to make sure that I don't miss anything. I'm also drinking the finest of Jack Daniels tonight, so if you want to have a drink with me, kick back, paint some hobby, should be a really cool hang. We'll kick on for an hour or so, I guess, depending on if the conversation's really popping off. I'll stick around for longer. If it sort of dies down, it might end up earlier, but I'm aiming for around that 1 hour mark. Yeah, so let's jump straight into it. So I'll start off with some channel updates. Now, some of these I've talked about before in various places, but people may not know about it, so I think it's worth bringing it up here and just talking about. Oh, that camera's supposed to be facing that way. You dumbass, Dean. There we go. So the first update that I want to discuss with you guys is that this year I will be operating as the team captain for Team Australia Warhammer 40k, which is Australia's national team for the World Team Championships. So for those of you who have not heard of that before, the World Team Championships is essentially, it's arguably one of the most prestigious tournaments in the world, and it basically takes each country from around the world. They take their 8 best players, form a team, and then we pit those teams against each other to find out which country is capable of putting together a team of the strongest players in the world. So it's really, really exciting, really, really prestigious, and I have been blessed to be elected as the captain for Team Australia this year. So that's really, really exciting. And the reason that that's particularly relevant to this channel update is because it's going to be quite demanding of my time and effort, which unfortunately is going to mean fewer videos on this channel. Not none, I'm still going to keep plugging away, and I never intend on stopping. However, the frequency of the videos is necessarily going to have to drop as I commit more of my time and resources and effort into making sure that I give Team Australia the best crack that we can. Team Australia has won. We came third last year. We came first the year before that, and then we came fourth the year before that. So we've got multiple years of back-to-back top 5 finishes, multiple podium finishes. So Australia has a bit of a reputation. We're very, very strong players. We also won best sportsmanship the year that we came first, which is an impressive feat, because often, the people who win tournaments aren't also well regarded as the best sports. So that's another thing that Australia is really, really passionate about, is that we want to bring top tier sportsmanship to top tier 40k. So I've got big shoes to fill, is essentially the point I'm trying to make here, and that's going to mean that I'm going to have to make sure I give it my all in terms of coordinating and leading the team of Australian 40k players into the fold. So yeah, really exciting times ahead. The positive side to that, I guess, is that I'm going to be working really closely with top players from all around the country, and as a result, I think that even though the quality of the frequency of the content might drop off, I think the quality is going to significantly increase, because we're going to be, I'm going to be able to get these guys on for interviews. Working closely with top players is going to improve my understanding of the game and my, capacity to perform at events. So it's going to be a bit of a win-win in that regard. So I look forward to making sure that I can incorporate as many of those things into this channel as possible and continue to provide you guys with the best chaos-themed content that I can, essentially, is what I'm aiming for. So you will have noticed that last year, as I went over as coach, Jeremy was our Chaos Space Marines player, so I worked very closely with him, because I'm obviously a Chaos Space Marine player myself, and we were able to bring a lot of really good quality content to you guys over here on YouTube that I wouldn't have been able to do if I wasn't part of the team. So being captain of the team this year is going to just really dial that up to the next level. So that's really exciting. The other thing that, and this relates to the Team Australia stuff, is obviously for Australians to fly all the way to Europe. It's like 24 hours on a plane, and then dealing with the exchange rate. The Australian dollar is not particularly strong, so everything over there is really expensive. It's going to be a very expensive trip. Now, when I signed up for captain, I could very easily afford it. I had thousands of dollars sitting in the bank that I'd put aside specifically for this trip. However, unfortunately, recently my cat has been diagnosed with cancer, and this cat he's my life. He sleeps on my face every night. I love him to death. So that's meant that we've had to put thousands of dollars into his cancer treatment, which has left me cash broke. So one of the things that I'm doing, because I'm really not a fan of asking for charity, and as much as I'm sure the community would get behind me, and I very much appreciate that, I'm a strong believer in, doing what you need to do to earn what you want in order to do what you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing a Blog for the Blood God fundraiser raffle. So I've got a whole bunch of objective markers, I've got a whole bunch of dice, and I've got a whole bunch of boxes of Khorne Berserkers. All of this was planned for, the Berserkers were planned for an upcoming project that I'm not going to really have the time to do now. And the dice and objective markers is something that I generally give away at tournaments and stuff like that as prizes. I just, or I'll give a handful of dice to my opponents every time I play them as a thank you for a good game, that sort of stuff. But basically what I'm going to do is sell some of this stuff in order to fund the trip, because now that the veterinarian bills have exhausted my savings account, that's the plan. And the way that I'm going to do this is with a raffle. So if you want to get involved in that, keep an eye on the Facebook page, and I'll probably do some updates here on YouTube as well. And basically there's going to be 5 bundles, each containing a set of objective markers, a bunch of dice, like 50 dice, and a box of Khorne Berserkers, or there's also a Lord Invocatus in there as well. And they're all just going to be raffled off, and then the money raised from that raffle is hopefully going to be enough to sort of soften the blow when it comes to this European trip and make it so that I can afford it. If not, I guess I have to get out a fucking credit card, because I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna leave the team behind. I'm not gonna leave them, I'm not gonna do them dirty. But at the same time, I need to find some way of funding that trip. So that raffle's going to be really exciting. I'm hoping that it'll generate plenty of money, but I'm also hoping that it'll be an exciting opportunity for people in the community to get involved, get some exclusive, channel themed not content, swag for you guys that's exclusive and isn't able to be, gotten anywhere else. So that's going to be really cool and really exciting, and hopefully go a long way to helping my current situation. I think that's more or less all I've got for channel updates, so to speak. I've got a few interviews lined up, which should be really exciting because there's been some really interesting developments with the World Eaters. I know a lot of the people who follow me on this channel are Chaos Space Marine players, and as am I, but unfortunately Chaos Space Marines hasn't really had much love lately. The recent balanced data slate sort of kicked them pretty hard, and as a result they're not seeing much competitive play. However, we are only like one balanced data slate, a couple points changes away from being top tier again, so I wouldn't stress too much about it. If you are a diehard Chaos Space Marine player, keep plugging away at it. And we've also got a new Codex coming out, which we can discuss that as well, which is really exciting. It's got 8 detachments in it, which is wild. The probability of one of those detachments being busted is like 100%. So yeah, I think Chaos Space Marine's right around the corner and are very likely to see some competitive play, so that's really cool. I'm just going to have a quick look down into the comments here because, like I said, I can't see them up on the screen, but I can see them on my phone here, so I know it sounds rude to be having a conversation with you guys whilst looking at my phone, but you got to do what you got to do. We've got Ian Stanford, morning from the UK. Okay, what time is it over there in the UK? I was a little worried when I launched this stream that it was going to be, the vast majority of my viewers are in either the UK or the US, and it's like midnight over there according to my app, so I was a little concerned that this stream wasn't going to draw much traction because it was going to be too late. But yeah, no, good morning to you, mate. You're probably not going to get on the Jack Daniels with me given that it's morning, but it's probably Easter, probably a public holiday for you guys, so maybe you are going to get on the beers, who knows. That's what I'm all about. Cody Kemp, tips and tricks for World Eaters versus Grey Knights. I'm thinking bringing 3 War Dogs and a Lord of Skulls. And then I've got a nice $10 super chat here from Matthew Creed. Hoping all the best for your cats, animals of family, anything you were looking to see out of CSM Codex. Hoping Vashdor winds up decent for once. Thank you very much for the donation. That $10 is very much appreciated, and I 100% agree. Cats, pets, they're family. I've got a dog and 3 cats, and they are my world. And I very much appreciate that. That's really, really kind of you. So thank you. As to answer your question about the CSM Codex, so it's got 8 detachments, which is going to be really, really hard to predict. Like, the hopes out of that detachment could be crazy. There could be a vehicle-based one that Vashdor slots into nicely. It'll be interesting to see what they do with data sheets. Are they going to change the data sheets a lot, like they did with the Tau Codex, where, like, for example, there was the Tau Codex split the crisis suits into multiple different, like, data sheets? Be interesting to see whether or not we get anything like that, or whether they keep the data sheets more or less the same, and then we just get detachments. If that's the case, then I think a vehicle-heavy one could be good. It'll also be interesting to see whether or not they keep the Dark Pact. So the Chaos Space Marine Codex, in my opinion, is quite odd in that the way that the index works at the moment is the detachment and the army rule, like, they're intricately connected. It's not like the World Eaters, where the World Eaters army rule is the Blessings of Khorne, where you do the rolls and you get all these different buffs, and then the detachment is just +1 attack, +1 strength, right? That could be anything. It doesn't impact directly with the army rule. Whereas for the Chaos Space Marines, it's like, oh, your army rule is Dark Pacts, and then your detachment gives you the marks of Chaos, and then those marks of Chaos directly tie in with your Pacts of Chaos, right? Your Dark Pacts. So it'll be really interesting to see how they do that. I actually think that the Dark Pacts have to go, because if they have the Dark Pacts as the army rule, and then you have the detachment gives you marks of Chaos, does that mean only one detachment is going to have marks of Chaos, and then the other detachments are not? That seems weird, right? It seems weird that there'd be like, the one detachment which gives you all the marks of chaos, and then every other detachment they're just not dedicated to any chaos gods. Like, that's, I don't know, that seems weird to me. So I think they'll probably end up making the marks of chaos the army rule, where it's like you can dedicate to one of these gods, and maybe, if you pick Khorne, you get lethal hits on 6s in combat. If you pick Tzeentch, you get lethal hits on 6s in shooting. If you pick Nurgle, you get sustained hits on 5s in shooting, and if you pick Slaanesh, you get sustained hits on 5s in melee. So they keep the same sort of feel, but they put that as the army rule. And then all of the different detachments, you can have all kinds of different detachments, one of which might be a Dark Pact detachment, which could be like your Word Bearers themed detachment, where it's like, oh, you've got the Dark Pact is your detachment rule, which allows those sustained and lethal hits from the army rule to trigger on 5s. And then you have a bunch of, stratagems based around that. But then you might have another detachment that's like Night Lords or something, and maybe they have like stealth if they're outside of 12, and they have access to like a lone operative stratagem and uppy downy rules and that sort of stuff. But they still have access to the marks of chaos. Is my point. So that's what I'm hoping to see for the Chaos Space Marines Codex. I am kind of concerned that we're going to see something really, really big in terms of rules changes for them. I don't think we're going to see much in the terms of unit data sheets and stuff. I think because most of them are probably going to stay the same. Because there's no, like, with the crisis suits kind of had to change, right? Because that unit didn't really make sense a lot of the time when you got all these different loadouts and all this different stuff going on. Whereas I think all the Chaos Space Marine data sheets, they kind of just work. So yeah, for that codex, that's sort of what I'm expecting. And yeah, but I agree. I would like to see a Vashtor list that's good again. I would also like to see the Disco Lord become relevant again. I'd like to see these Helldrakes become relevant again. Like, I'm not sitting here painting it just because I love painting trim. I'm painting it because I'm sort of preparing for, a future where the Helldrake becomes good. Because the one thing that I do kind of like about 40k at the moment is, because we're getting these balanced data slate updates and the rules changes and whatnot, any unit could become good. Any unit could go from unplayably bad to OP in one update, right? And as a result, it's a good idea to just flesh out your collection with lots of stuff so that you can adapt and move. So I've got 2 Helldrakes in the cases behind me there, painting a third up now, so that if the rules changes come through and it's like, okay, Helldrakes just went down from 200 points to like 150 points, and there's a new change that comes through for aircraft that changes the way that they interact, or something like that. Like, instead of being neg 1 to hit, maybe they're neg 1 ballistic skill, so that means it stacks with neg 1 to hit, which means you could, like, pop smoke on them if they had the smoke keyword. I don't know. There could be something that could come through that could make Helldrakes really interesting and really, really good. Which would then, I'd be glad that I sat here and painted the fucking trim on this thing. So that's what I'm sort of doing this for. And yeah, who knows? Who knows? Let's just have a quick look at the remaining comments, and then I'm going to jump into talking about my list that I'm running for this weekend's or this coming event, GT Radicalism, which is 80-player GT in Ballarat. So Matthew's saying it's midnight in California, so bedtime soon. Okay, that's good to know. Hopefully I don't end up losing everybody off this stream because it's midnight. Then we've got Simon. Do you still include Zerkers or without Mo or Khan in your World Leaders list, or do you prefer spamming 8-bound? That's actually a beautiful segue into the list that I'm running for Radicalism. So the list that I'm running includes 2 units of Khorne Berserkers, so that should answer your question. However, I do think it is still critical for them to have a Master of Executions in that unit, because without that Master of Executions, they just don't. Their whole trick, their whole gimmick doesn't work. The whole trick with the Khorne Berserkers, and the reason that I have 2 units of 10 in this list, is because being able to put a unit of Khorne Berserkers on an objective, right? So often your opponent will move into the center, right? And you charge onto it with your Berserkers, you kill whatever they put on the objective, and now you've got this unit of Khorne Berserkers in the center, and your opponent now has to choose, do they shoot you dead? And if they do that, right, they have to stay far enough away to dodge your Blood Surge, right? But that means that they're going to shoot you dead, then you're going to be able to spend a command point to stick that objective, so you still control it in the next turn, right? So they're like, okay, well then shooting him off actually achieves nothing, because he's still going to control the objective. So then they go, okay, maybe I have to charge him, so that I can kill him off of it and take the objective myself, resulting in him no longer controlling it. But, because I have always fights first, they kind of can't charge you, right? Unless they got something really, really durable. But most units are not able to charge that Khorne Berserker unit without suffering severe casualties. Like I was doing the maths on it earlier, and even like a unit of Exalted 8-bound. If Exalted 8-bound charge in, the Berserkers fight first, the Berserkers are going to kill enough of those Exalted 8-bound that the Exalted 8-bound probably don't kill all of those Khorne Berserkers in return, and as a result the Khorne Berserkers still hold the objective. So it's a really interesting one where it's like, it's kind of hard to kick them off an objective, and in 10th edition it's all about objective control. As long as you're controlling the objectives for longer than your opponent, you're generally going to win the game on points, because it's going to be hard for them to achieve their secondaries, and you're going to have pretty solid control on primary if you can control the objectives for longer than they do. So that's why my current list has 2 units of 10 Berserkers with a Master of Executions in each. One of them I give the Berserker's Glaive, and then the other one I give the Favored of Khorne relic. Now I know both of those enhancements, I should say, both of those enhancements cop some nerfs, but I still think they're both very good. So the first one we'll talk about is the Favored of Khorne. Now it went down in points, so even though yes it got nerfed that you could only use it once per game instead of once per battle round, the fact that it went down in points makes it a little bit more interesting as well. And I actually did a video talking about this in detail recently, so I won't bang on about it too much here. But I still think it's an absolute mandatory relic to take, because there are times where if you don't get that advance in charge, you're fucked, and you just lose, because you don't have the ability to go out and touch those things that you need to touch. So just on the off chance that you need to do that, it's huge. And then the other one is resurrecting Angron. And even though obviously it's very hard to resurrect Angron, when you have this relic and you have a few units of Khorne Berserkers in your army, and those Berserkers are on objectives, and you've got Jackals on your objectives, so you're able to roll the 8 dice. Then for each Jackal or Berserker unit, you're able to re-roll one of those. Then, if you still don't get Angron back, you can re-roll the whole lot, and then you can re-roll one for each unit of Berserkers again. It actually massively increases the chances of bringing Angron back. And if you can bring Angron back, you are very likely to win the game. Because taking a 420 point unit, just adding it to your army, something that your opponent probably spent their entire turn trying to kill, is huge. And also the fact that you can do that means that your opponent is disincentivized to target Angron. They're less likely to go all in and try to kill him when they know that you can just resurrect him, and then they've wasted all their time. So as a result, it makes Angron significantly more powerful and significantly more interesting. So I think it's an absolute must-have for that alone. Normally you run him on a Juggernaut Lord. The reason that I've got him on the Master of Executions is because I want 2 Master of Executions so that I can have 2 units of Berserkers that have that fight first ability. So that's why I have him on that. If I only had a single unit of Khorne Berserkers, I'd have the Mo with the Glaive and the Juggerlord. And if I had no Berserkers, then I'd have no Master of Executions, in which case I'd have the Juggerlord. So generally speaking, he's going to go on a Juggerlord in most lists, unless you have double Berserker Brick, which is something that's not particularly common or popular. I just realized I broke the wing on this guy. But yeah, so if you've got the double Berserkers, then absolutely look into going crazy with the Favored of Khorne on a Mo. If not, put him on a Juggerlord. The Juggerlord is also, I think he's pretty underrated, to be honest. The Juggerlord, he's surprisingly durable, he's surprisingly fast, and he'll bully small things. Like he'll kill a 5-man unit of scouts, or he'll kill like a bunch of marines, or if your opponent's got some like warp spiders, or just something small. And one of the things the world eaters often struggle with is killing those small units that your opponent puts out to bait you. Because if you've got 6 Exalted 8-bound and they put a unit of 5 scouts on an objective marker, you don't want to send the 6 Exalted 8-bound, because then they're out in the open and then your opponent's able to turn their guns onto them. You're in their charge range of all their stuff, so they're able to turn around and get into combat with you. So, and you want to be the one charging into them, not the other way around. So having something like a Juggerlord who's able to just push out and hit like that is really, really cool. So that's the Favored of Khorne relic. However, like I said, mine's on a Master of Executions. What else? I got the list right. I've got the army sitting right next to me. I've got Angron, of course. I don't think you can run World Eaters without him. I actually think he's absolutely critical, and I'm actually kind of terrified that in the next update he's going to get a nerf, and that has potential to really, really hurt the World Eaters lists, and it would be not good if he got nerfed. And that's not just saying that it would be not good because he's one of our best units. I actually think that he's functionally required for World Eaters to play, right? And the reason I say that is because we're a pure combat army, and he's our only source of reroll hits. And if you go into something like a Custodes army where they're like, cool, we're putting neg1 to hit on all of our stuff, all of a sudden you're like, okay, so I've got Khorne Berserkers and 8-bound that are hitting on 4s with no rerolls. It's like, that's unacceptable. You can't have a combat army where the identity of the army is we go in and kill you in combat and make it so that they hit on 4s without rerolls. It's just unacceptable. And as a result, you actually have to bring Angron so that if your opponent has any abilities to put you to neg1 to hit, which so many armies have, you're able to respond by going, okay, cool, yes, you're going to make me hit on 4s, but I am going to mitigate that to some extent, just not fully, but to some extent, by having Angron provide those all too critical rerolls. So that's one of the main reasons why I think Angron is a must-have. Even if he went up in points, you'd still have to take him. You kind of have no choice until we get a Codex, and if the Codex has some other way of getting reroll hits in the units, then obviously that becomes significantly less of a problem. But as it stands, you need him for that. He's also really good because he's one of the only things that has fly, outside of the Helldrakes, of course. So if you want to be flying over your opponent, that's really helpful, because a savvy opponent, if you don't have fly, they can actually just put out like rainbows of units, so that you can't charge the units behind. You have to charge the units at the front. And if they do that, then your 8-bound, it doesn't matter how powerful they are in combat, they're not going to hit that tank that you're trying to kill. The guard artillery, they're all just going to sit behind units of Cadians, and you can't do damage to them. So having fly is really important, makes it really hard for your opponent to pull off those sorts of really oppressive tricks. So Angron's a must-have for that, so that's why Angron's in the list. And he's also really effective into things that are like neg1 damage, right? Because all of the 8-bound variants, the Berserkers, most of the characters, the limit, that most of them do 2 damage or less. And as a result, anything that's got neg1 damage inbuilt, like a lot of the Space Marine stuff, or there's a bunch of it out there, like everything really, really struggles to do damage to them. So having Angron be able to go, cool, well, I do d6 plus 2, it's like, okay, cool, and then your neg1 damage, I don't really care about that at that stage. When I'm doing that high damage, neg1 is like, the difference is that if you've got 2 damage and they have neg1, that's 50% reduction, whereas if your damage d6 plus 2, say you're rolling an average of a 3, so you're doing an average of 5 damage, and they neg1, that's a reduction of like 20%. So it's really significant, the difference in damage reduction that you get when you have Angron in the list. And then not to mention he has the ability to be resurrected, which can be, it can turn a losing game into a winning game. There'll be some times where you're like, wow, I didn't go first. My opponent did this really smart thing in their first turn. They've done a whole ton of damage to me. I'm in a lot of trouble now. But then Angron comes back, and you're like, okay, now it's back on again, right? So his ability to pull you back into games that you were losing, even though that's relatively rare, is really, really important to the army. So what else have I got? I got a unit of Jackals. I would love to take 2 units of Jackals, but I think 1 is an absolute minimum mandatory. I also think Jackals are a really interesting one, and there's so many things in the World Eaters army that I feel this comment applies to, and that is that they're simultaneously mandatory and overcosted. So like if you compare Jackals to like cultists from CSM, the cultists are arguably just better and cheaper. Like the Jackals obviously would get they do more damage in melee, but they're never going to make melee because they're fucking Jackals and they just die, right? So who cares if they have, but they get 4 damage and they got AP 1 and this, that, like whatever, it doesn't matter. There's a Skull Smasher in the unit, it's a 2 damage weapon, it's like who cares? That Skull Smasher is almost never going to make combat. And like yes, they got the 6-up Feeling of Pain, which can become a 5-up with the Blessings rolls, which is good, but ultimately they're never going to really achieve much more than sitting on a backfield objective and sticking it and then screening out your opponent. That's all they do. And that's the same thing that the cultists for CSM do, or the Cadians do I think it's the Cadians that have sticky objectives for Guard, Poxwalkers for the Death Guard. Like there's a ton of units that are the same in that they have one function, and it is to sticky objectives and then screen backfield. And all of them are so much cheaper than Jackals. So I think Jackals are overcosted, but at the same they're a must-take. And I'm concerned that GW are going to look at it and be like, every single list has Jackals, therefore Jackals go up in points. Every single list has Angron, therefore Angron goes up in points. And if they do that, then I think World Eaters could potentially, fall completely off the competitive meta. Potentially. What else have I got? I'll finish talking about the list, and then I'll catch up on the comments. Make sure, like I said at the start, if you do want to have your comment read and replied to, make sure to chuck a $1 donation attached to it, because otherwise I might miss it. I'll do my best not to miss anyone's, but yeah, that goes a long way to helping. And I also very much appreciate the monetary support, because like I said at the start of the video, having a cat recently go through some cancer therapy, which has absolutely devastated me and the family, both emotionally and financially. And any support in that regard financially would be greatly appreciated. So let's just keep chatting about the list. So I've got the 2 units of Berserkers I've discussed, the 2 Master of Executions, the Jackals, Angron. I've got 2 Rhinos in the list. Rhinos, I think, are kind of underrated. One of the good things about the Rhino, I was tossing up between 1 Rhino and 2 units of Jackals, or 2 Rhinos and 1 unit of Jackals. The reason I ended up going with the double Rhinos because I'm afraid of Guard and their indirect, and this way I can actually deploy both the Rhinos with Berserkers inside out of line of sight, and then put the 8 bound in strategic reserves, deep strike them. And now it's going to be very hard for the Guard to shoot out my damage, because their indirect is not effective at killing Angron, and it's okay at killing Rhinos, but not amazing. And as a result, I can probably protect the Berserkers for a turn or 2. Whereas if I instead had Jackals, that would mean that I have to have 1 Rhino on the board. 1 unit of Berserkers on the board, not inside a transport. And if I do that, that unit of Berserkers just dies turn 1. To Guard, and there's lots of Guard out there, so that's why I brought 2 Rhinos. The other really good thing that the second Rhino provides is Rhinos are a fantastic unit for things like Cleanse, things like Teleport Homers, things like Investigate Signals, They're really good. So basically, once the berserkers have launched out of them, those rhinos can just drive around, just doing whatever they need to do. They're really good action monkeys. They're surprisingly tough, and because they're going to be empty, like the berserkers will have jumped out, your opponent's really going to struggle to justify putting their damage into a rhino. They're like, it's an empty rhino, it's sitting on an objective somewhere, and people are going to be like, ugh, I have to try to move around so that I can draw a line of sight so that I can blow up an empty rhino. That sucks, you know. So being able to force your opponent into sort of suboptimal decision making is really cool. And in combat heavy matchups, what I can do is I have to deploy inside the rhinos, but what I can do is I can just disembark out into ruins that are out of line of sight, so my opponent can't shoot me, and if they don't have any indirect, they're not going to be able to shoot me, and then they're going to have to charge me, and then I fight first and kill them. So having these units of berserkers like that, and then those rhinos, they're free to go into central objectives, to sticky things, to charge things, to tie them up, to, you know, do all kinds of different stuff. I really like rhinos in the berserker, in the world leaders list, particularly if you have berserkers. What I used to do is I used to have a single rhino. I'd deploy one unit inside and another one nearby, and then turn 1 or turn 2, that unit would disembark, go and charge, and then the second one would jump in, and then that rhino would drive off somewhere, so that next turn I could disembark out of that, and then sort of rinse and repeat, and use it as a bit of a platform. But yeah, for this event, I decided to go with the more conservative idea of having multiple rhinos, and I'm very glad, because looking at the lists for this event went live this morning, because it's this coming weekend, and there is so many guard players with so much artillery that I'm just like, thank God, because I would have just been blasted off the table if I didn't have these rhinos. So that's the rhino element. Then I've also got Khan the Betrayer. Now, the interesting thing with him is I can attach him to the berserkers if I don't put the Master of Executions in them. So depending on the matchup, I'll either put the Master of Executions with them, or I'll put Khan. So this will be the unit that has the Favored of Khorne one. It'll either be the Favored of Khorne guy will go in there, or Khan will go in there, and then the other one will always have the glaive. And then the idea here is basically depends on what's more important for the unit. Is having a fights first character important, or is having access to reroll 1s to hit and wound, and access to a character in there that does 3 damage, 9 attacks, like does really good work? Is that more important? So an example would be if I'm playing, let's say I'm playing Drukhari, where they have lots of MSU, lots of small units that are all really scary in combat, right? Well, I'm going to want to have 2 units that fight first, because then they have to throw they throw 3 units of Incubi into me or something like that, and I just go, cool, I fight first, and I just go and kill them all, right? Or they go, cool, I'm going to shoot you with Scourges, and it's like, cool, they shoot, they kill 2 or 3 Berserkers, and I blood surge into them, and then I fight first, and I go and kill all the Incubi, right? So in that matchup, being able to fight first is absolutely massive. However, if the opponent is like, I don't know, say they're Imperial Knights or Guard or something like that, it's like, okay, let's say they're Guard, being able to fight first is irrelevant, because they're probably not going to charge me. If they've got a unit of Bullgrins, but I'll probably, because I'm so much faster than them, I'm going to charge the Bullgrins, kill them, and then there'll be no more combats, right? Outside of the ones that I initiate. So the fights first isn't super relevant there. However, when you're versing a bunch of tanks, being able to reroll 1s to wound is going to be very interesting, because it's going to result in more wounds and therefore more dead tanks. So in the Guard matchup, or a Knights matchup or something like that, I'm actually more likely to throw Khan in with the unit, and then that Master of Executions, he probably, because he'll be running on his own now, he'll go into strategic reserves, and then he'll probably just come on and do an investigate signals, or he'll come on and he'll do a teleport homer or behind enemy lines, or those sorts of secondaries, and he'll just sort of fill the action monkey role. Whereas in the games where the Master of Executions is in the unit and Khan is on his own, what I actually do is I put Khan in one of the rhinos as well. because the Rhinos have a carrying capacity of 12, so you can put the 10 Berserkers, 1 Master of Executions, and Khan. And the good thing about this is if your opponent throws out something small onto an objective in the middle somewhere, you can actually just go, cool, I'm going to send Khan out of the Rhino, I'm going to leave the Berserkers, I don't want to waste 10 Berserkers on something small, so I'm going to send Khan out, he's going to kill it, and then, because he kills, like, hard, he'll kill 5 Marines, no problems. So he kills it, and then in your opponent's turn, if they go to charge him to kill him off of the objective, so if they try to shoot him off of the objective, he can sticky it, and if they go to charge him off the objective, they're going to kill him, but he fights on death. So he's going to kill the thing that killed him. So as a result, Khan is actually, for 100 points, he is an amazing trading piece. The things that he can do are really, really hard to work around. So even though he doesn't get to fight first like the Berserkers, and therefore people can charge him and they can kill him, if he fights on death, which he does automatically, he doesn't need to roll for it like everybody else, he's going to kill the thing that charged him, and then he wins, right? And even better, even though he's dead, he can sticky the objective provided he kills the opponent. So if he's on the objective and they charge and they kill him, but he kills them, well, at the end of that phase, they didn't take the objective off of me, which means I can sticky the objective, and as a result, even though they went in and killed everybody and nothing lived, I still control it. So Khan is probably one of my favorite. He's probably one of my favorite units in the game for that very reason. The fact that he's really densely packed power. He's really versatile in that you can attach him to units or you can run him solo, and he, as a 100-point unit, he presents a really interesting challenge for your opponent. So yeah, he's cool as shit. I also have Lord Invocatus. He's a must-take as well. Just the scout move alone is so valuable. And he pairs really well with my 3 units of Exalted 8-bound. So I've got 3 units of 3. Now I know a lot of people take 1 and 6, like 3 and 6. But I find that one of the biggest areas World Eaters struggle is the MSU trading game. If your opponent's able to consistently throw out small things that don't matter, then you really struggle because you send out your 6-man and then they kill your 6-man and now you're out of units. Whereas if you have 2 3-men, you can go, cool, they've thrown something onto the objective, I throw it on, kill them off, they throw on, kill me off, then I can throw on, kill them off. So I much prefer the 3-mans. And also the 3-mans have a sergeant, and the sergeant is where a lot of the damage from those units comes from because he has the twin chain fists. So he's a much more effective damage dealer. So if you take 2 units of 3, you get 2 sergeants, whereas if you take 1 unit of 6, you only get a single one. Now, there's obviously a lot of advantages to the 6-man as well that are worth discussing. Let me just grab a drink. So the 6-man has a bigger footprint, gets more utility from stratagems, because any stratagem that you use on it, you're using that stratagem on 6 guys instead of on 3. So if you're using, for example, +1 to wound, that's really good on them, and that applies to all 6 models in the unit. Whereas if you've got 2 units of 3 thrown in and you use that stratagem, you're only able to affect 1 of your 3-mans. Same goes for the neg-1 damage in melee. That's one of the really good things into Grey Knights. And I think somebody mentioned in the comments above something about advice for versing Grey Knights. The Exalted 8-bound are really good into Grey Knights because you charge them in, you can neg-1 damage, which halves the damage that the Grey Knights are going to be able to do to you, which means that you're very likely to survive that fight and get multiple rounds of combat into them, which is what you'll need to chip them away. And the Exalted 8-bound also have really high AP, which is really important for killing Grey Knights because they have the ability to use, I think it's called True Silver Armor, essentially Armor of Contempt, and that can be really hard for things like Khorne Berserkers to deal with. So Grey Knights are an absolute pain in the ass to verse if you're a World Eater player and you don't have that big unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound. And there's lots of Grey Knights at this upcoming event, so a small part of me is wishing that instead of the 3 units of 3, I went 1 unit of 3, 1 unit of 6. But we'll see how we go. My playstyle tends to lend more into having multiple units because it means that any mistakes that you make with positioning that you don't get punished as hard for. Whereas if you've got one big unit of 6, if you misposition that unit and your opponent's like, oh, well, I actually can move this way. You thought I was going to move that way. I'm going to move this way, which means I actually can draw a line of sight into them. And now this thing's going to come on from strategic reserves that you forgot that I had. And now they can see it as well. And they go, and they kill all 6. Then you're like, oh my god, game over. Whereas if you have multiple units of 3, you've got a little bit of insulation against that sort of thing, which is a really, really good thing to have. And that works well for me. And then the way that I generally run the 8-bound, because I have 3 units, is 2 of them will deploy on the board and they get the scout move from the Lord Invocatus, and then the 3rd unit will go in deep strike and it comes down as my rapid ingress threat. That being said, I'm starting to come around on rapid ingress for World Eater specifically. So rapid ingress, I think, is one of the most broken stratagems in 10th edition. It's an edition defining stratagem, because it is just so goddamn good. Being able to do that in your opponent's turn is wild, right? However, the World Eaters are so fast that often you don't need to rapid ingress. If your opponent doesn't have good indirect pieces, let's say I go first, right? I do my turn, they do their turn, then in my turn 2, I'm actually better off just deep striking those 8-bounds somewhere safe where they can't get shot, so that in my opponent's turn, I can then just move out and charge something. Like, I'm positioned so that the next turn I can move out and charge something. Whereas, if I don't deploy them and I save them so that in my opponent's turn 2 I can rapid ingress, often I'm going to end up putting them more or less where I put them in the turn 2 anyway. So I've spent a CP to not really achieve that much. Now, obviously, you get to wait until you see what your opponent's movement phase is before you drop them, which is really good. You also get to see what happens in your fight phase before you drop them, because if I drop them in my turn 2, then I go in my movement phase, then I go in and I do my combats, and say I don't kill something, and I'm like, oh god, now they're going to kill that back, and I'm going to have nothing on that flank. If I deep strike them in my turn, I don't have all of that information. Whereas if I wait until my opponent's turn, I can then rapid ingress them on that flank to top up that area of the board. So there is a lot to be said for rapid ingress. I just think that World Eaters, like, almost counterintuitively benefit from it the least. Because our units are so fast, we can often get where we want to go and make the charges that we want to make anyway. Whereas, like, something like, a unit of Chosen, for example, for CSM, they're nowhere near as fast as us. So they want to be able to rapid ingress on, so that they can come on near, like, 9 inches away from their opponent, so that the next turn they only need to make a 3-inch charge. Whereas with us, because we can potentially move 17 inches with all of our 8-bound, like, we don't need to be that close. So it's not as critical for us as it is for the other factions. But it's also obviously one of the things that I advocate for strongly is always having something in deep strike in your army, just so that your opponent has to respect it. It keeps them honest. If you don't have anything in deep strike, they can just go, cool, I'm going to abandon my backfield, I'm just going to push up into the middle. And there's this big fight in the middle. They've got one unit of something crap on their home, and it's never in danger. And that's a bad way to play the game. I think you want to have something in deep strike reserves, and what you're essentially doing is you're saying, I'm not going to be able to use this one piece, but in order for you to prevent me from getting massive value, you need to sacrifice multiple pieces of your army to screen it out. So, because they don't want you taking their home with a rapid ingress, so they're going to have to go, whatever's holding their home is going to have to be further back than it normally would be, and then they're also going to have probably 2 units that prevent you from dropping in adjacent to their home. So you're basically trading 1 unit for 2 of theirs conceptually outside of the actual battle, because you're saying, I'm going to make it hard for you. So I think that the rapid ingress is good. The deep strike is the real power, though. The fact that the Exalted 8-bound can deep strike just means that your opponent has to put in considerable effort to making sure that you don't get that value. So I like just having 1 unit of 3 for that purpose. and then the 2 units of 3, they're the ones that get the Exalted, the Lord Invocatus's scout move. And the idea there is pretty straightforward. What I'll generally do is I'll deploy them on the line so they're as close to my opponent as possible. And then if I get first turn, you can scout in, you can then move, you can go do turn 1 charges, tag things, pin things with your Exalted 8-bound, make it so they can't fall back, therefore they can't shoot you, and just really disrupt your opponent's game plan. That's obviously really powerful. However, generally what I find happens is, because your opponent sees the capacity of your 8-bound to make those turn 1 charges, your opponent's going to deploy really deep. They're going to deploy way back in their deployment zone, where you can't get that turn 1 charge. But that's the 8-bound having done their job. Their job isn't necessarily to get that turn 1 charge and kill things. Their job is to make your opponent think that you're going to do that, and therefore your opponent deploys in a very suboptimal manner. They deploy so far, like a lot of people like to deploy close enough to the center so that if they draw area denial turn 1, they can just send something in and take it. If they draw cleanse, they want to be able to send on to 2 objectives, take it. You know, if they draw extend battle lines, if they draw secure no man's land, there's so many cards that require you being in the middle of the board. If you have those 8-bound and you go, cool, if you go in the middle of the board, I'm going to kill you, right? Well, now your opponent's in a really tricky spot. They have to deploy so far back that they actually can't get to the middle of the board in that first turn. And then, you know, they go into their first turn, they draw their cards, they can't achieve them because they're too far away, so they move forward, but if they move forward, they're moving into your threat range, and now you can go in and get them. So it puts your opponent in a really tricky spot, and it's all facilitated by the scout move of the Lord Invocatus and the Exalted 8-bound, so they're an absolute must-have. There's a few things that I would have really liked to get in the list. I would have really liked to have had a single unit of regular 8-bound. They're really, really good. And I think they're underrated. I think a lot of people look at the Exalted 8-bound and think they're just so much better. But they're not really, they're just different. Having an aura of reroll 1s to wound is really good for when you've got Berserkers, because if you don't have Khan attached, those Berserkers going in with a ton of attacks that reroll 1s to wound is really, really good. Even Angron, because he's not wounding everything on 2s, the amount of times that Angron will charge in and he'll be wounding something on 3s, and yeah, he gets 9 attacks, he gets 9 hits because he's rerolling his hits, but then sometimes of those 9 hits, he'll only get like 5 wounds, 4 wounds, because your opponent, you know, is toughness 10 or whatever, so he's wounding on 3s. So say you get 4 wounds, you roll a bit poor, and then your opponent goes, cool, I've got an invulnerable save. They might have a 4-up invulnerable save, and they go, cool, they roll it, they pass one, they fail the next one, they use a command point, they pass that one, and then they fail the last one, and it's like, cool, you only got 1 successful wound, and you're doing d6 plus 2 damage. You don't even kill the vehicle that you just hit, right? So being able to reroll 1s on your wounds just means that you're getting 9 hits, and you're likely to get, you know, 6 or 7 wounds through instead of 4 or 5, which is, you know, obviously very, very big difference. So even on something like Angron, who has a very strong attack, being able to reroll those wounds is massive. They also have the inbuilt scout move, so they don't need Lord Invocatus. So an argument could be made in this list is I could have taken out one of the Exalted 8-bound, taken out Lord Invocatus, and then put in a couple of units of regular 8-bound. And now they're going to scout on their own, they're going to provide those auras. The Exalted 8-bound, they can go in Deep Strike, and they can be my rapid ingress threat. You know, that's one way that I could have wrote the list. And that way I have those auras. They also have 3 damage melee weapons, which is something the army doesn't have a lot of. And it's something that's really, really good into things like Custodes. So being able to do that, they kind of fill the role. I know a lot of people talk about bringing Forge Fiends to counter Custodes, but I personally prefer the 8-bound, because the Forge Fiend's got 3d3 shots, so it's likely to get 6 shots. The Sergeant in the 8-bound unit has 5 attacks, so he's more or less the same. Same strength, because he's going in strength 10. Same AP, same damage, right? So the Sergeant in that unit hits almost as hard as a Forge Fiend. But this unit also has 2 more guys, so this unit puts out a lot more hurt than a Forge Fiend. This unit also doesn't require line of sight like a Forge Fiend. And this unit can run through walls. This unit can get onto objectives, can push people off and then claim the objective that the opponent was holding. There's lots of things that make the regular 8-bound just better at doing what the Forge Fiend supposedly claims to be good at doing. The only real thing is that the Forge Fiend, because it does it in shooting, it's less susceptible to opponents having fights first and that sort of stuff. So, but I still think, all things considered, I'd rather units of 8-bound than Forge Fiends, and I really wish I could fit them in this list. It's one of those things where, you know, when you submit a list and then you immediately, like, the lists get released, you haven't even looked at them yet, lists are live, you haven't even looked at them yet, but you look at your list and you're like, fuck, I really should swap that one unit out for this unit, you know? Like, if I could resubmit this list right now, I would probably drop the Lord Invocatus and 2 units of Exalted 8-bound. No, Lord Invocatus and 1 unit of Exalted 8-bound. Make that into 2 units of regular 8-bound. And then the other 2 units of Exalted 8-bound I'd combine into 1 unit of 6, so that's my rapid ingress threat. So I've got the 1 unit of 6 that can come down, and I've got the 2 units of 3 regular 8-bound, and no Lord Invocatus. But, you know, it'll be what it'll be. You can't win them all. And Lord Invocatus is good in that one of the other things you can do in certain matchups is you can use him to scout move Khorne Berserkers. So there's some matchups where Khorne Berserkers are way better than anything else, because let's say your opponent's got neg 1 damage, the Berserkers don't really care because most of their damage is damage 1, and let's say they've got like really good saves, so the way you want to kill them is just bulk attacks. You just want to go, cool, here is 50 hits, you know, here is 30 wounds, you know, past 30 saves, right? The Berserkers are really good at that, and in those matchups, what I do is I deploy Khan inside one of the transports on his own, right, so that transport has still got 11 transport capacity. Then I'll deploy one of the units of Berserkers on the line, but within 6 inches of the transport. And that way, if I go first, I can scout move with Lord Invocatus, scout move the Berserkers up 6, then move them a further 6 with an advance, so use the stratagem for another 6, and now you've moved 18 inches, because you've disembarked, you've scout moved 6, then you've moved 6, then you've advanced 6, and if you really need it, you can get the +2 move, so you can move a total of 20 inches first turn, and then charge your opponent, and if you do that, sometimes that charge is going to end the game. That's going to be game over, because if you get that charge, you kill that scary thing that requires bulk damage to kill, and then also, you're now right in front of their army, you're right in their face, with a unit that's going to Blood Surge move if they try to shoot it, and it's going to fight first if they try to fight it. And your opponent just spazzes out, they don't know what to do, because you've just thrown this real big problem right in their face. So that's a lot of fun to do, and that's also unlocked by having Lord Invocatus. So if I took him out in favor for regular 8-bound, he wouldn't be able to do that, right? So having that trick, I'm happy with the list, and I think it's going to do quite well, but we'll see how we go. That's just one of the sort of considerations that I had when writing it. There's a few other things that I was toying with. One of them was to drop both rhinos, and drop both rhinos and 1 unit of 8-bound, I think it was. There was this list idea, and then using those points to put in a Land Raider. And the idea there is you can have a unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound inside the Land Raider, and what you do is you basically position that forward. If your opponent if you go first, you can scout move it in, send it in, do your damage, but if your opponent goes first, you can scout move it back into the Land Raider. The Land Raider's out of line of sight. Nobody can kill a Land Raider that they can't see. So now you've got these Exalted 8-bound sitting in there, and then from there they can disembark 3, then move 9, then an additional 2 from the Blessings, then an additional 6 from your advance, and then 2d6 charge. So from that Land Raider, they can threaten the entire board. That's like 33 inches or something like that. They can threaten anywhere on the board. And there's nothing your opponent can do about it because they can't shoot them because they're freaking hidden inside a Land Raider. So that's really exciting. And then the Land Raider obviously can also provides a little bit of shooting range, and he's also a tough unit that just sits on an objective somewhere and is really fucking hard to kill. So I think there is a world where you bring a Land Raider as well. So I was toying around with those lists. However, I would like to play a few practice games with that list before I submit it to a tournament. And this list that I'm running now is very, very close to the list that I ran to Adelaide Uprising, which is a list that I performed quite well with. I went 6 wins, 2 losses. I ended up placing 10th overall, I think it was, or 11th overall, which I'm relatively happy with. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that list performed quite well. So I am more than happy to give it another crack. God, how are you supposed to paint under here? Helldrakes are the worst. Alright, cool. I'm just going to jump back into the comments. Now, just a reminder to everyone, the comments is going to fill up, and I'm not, I might miss some of them. So if there's a comment in particular that you would really like, my feedback on, you can press the little button, super chat, and you can do $1, and that'll highlight the comment for me, so I'll make sure that I don't miss it. And then that also is greatly appreciated funding. So not sure, a few of you might have only just recently joined the stream, but I did say at the start that one of the exciting things that we've got coming up is a raffle that I'm doing, where I'm going to be giving away objective markers, dice, and some Khorne Berserkers that I had bought for an upcoming project that I'm going to have to cancel. And that's because I've got some significant financial hardships. One of my cats has recently been diagnosed with liver cancer, so it's very, very expensive. It's basically drained mine and my wife's savings account, and as a result, I'm now in a position where I kind of can't afford to go to Europe this year, and I was going there as captain for Team Australia. So I'm in a real tricky spot financially. So any support that you do show through that super chats or through attending the raffles or the Patreon, all of that sort of stuff, massively appreciated. And it'll also ensure that I don't miss your comment. So yeah, so let's have a look. So that's my list. I'm going to have a look at the comments, and then I'll do a little bit of a chat about the event itself and what my sort of expectations and hopes are. And then we'll go through a few different things that I wanted to talk about. I've got a really interesting video concept that I'm working on that I'm hoping you guys can help me develop further with the comments that you guys provide in here. That's going to be really interesting. So we'll get stuck into that shortly as well. Where are we at with comments? Okay. Simon asked another question. What do you think about the recent trend of adding Mauler Fiends and Forge Fiends? What I might actually do is I might just flip through all of these comments, read all of them, and then go back and respond to some, because I don't want to get stuck on this one for 10-15 minutes and then miss the other questions. So we've got one question's about Forge Fiends, Mauler Fiends. So Ben Stafferson, does Angron do enough if we have neg 1 to hit and neg 1 weapon skill? For example, the Death Guard, Contagion, and Nurglings. We've got ACRP PRCA, whatever that is. Yeah, it feels like that for all of our units. They're either untakeably trash or must take and overcosted. Yeah, that's 100% agree with that. Ethan, how would you go about making a list without Angron in it? I will talk about that shortly, because I do have 1 or 2 ideas there. Shoddy has asked, he already has all the major units for World Eaters between DP, Hellbrute, Mauler Fiend, Forge Fiend. What should I prioritize next? 8-bound is the quick answer to that question. Oracle 949, do you think it's viable to play Angron and Khorne Lord of Skulls in the same list? Absolutely. I've got a bunch of content out on that, but I'll talk about that in a moment. Then we've got Oracle saying he plays Death Guard 2 and he's tried both neg 1 weapon skill and ballistic skill a few times into the World Eaters, and it's bad. It's better to take neg 1 save against World Eaters. That has been my experience as well. Most people that I verse with the World Eaters do take the neg 1 save instead of the neg 1 weapon skill. I don't necessarily agree with that comment though. I'm always terrified that they're going to take the neg 1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, so we'll see how we'll talk about that as well. And then we've got Inertia, I think it's pronounced. Hello, I'm looking to start a 40k and I really like the look and aggressive style of World Eaters, but my friends have advised me against it as a first army. They are suggesting Custodians or Black Templars. Alright, cool. So, I guess the first question we've got here is talking about Forge Fiends and Mauler Fiends. So, I did an interview recently with Michael... Fuck, I forgot his surname. A bloke named Michael from Canada who took Forge Fiends and Mauler Fiends and went undefeated at a 6-round major. So clearly they have something going for them. However, after talking to him, and you'll see this, you can see this in the interview, which is up on my channel right now, is it sounds to me like a lot of his games were either, and this is not to just take away from his win at all, we obviously celebrate his win, but they were into people who didn't really have, either didn't have the tools in their list to deal with that much armor, which is one of the selling points for that playstyle, right? You go, cool, Maul Fiends, Forge Fiends, it's all toughness 10, it's all, multiple wounds, it's very hard to deal with. However, where I play, and in most like the hyper competitive spaces, people are used to having to kill Chaos Knights when they bring 13 War Dogs. And as a result, Forge Fiends and Maul Fiends aren't that hard to kill. So it is meta dependent. That one is essentially what I'm trying to say. If the meta is hostile towards mech, then you're really going to struggle. And the other thing is it seemed like in a few games he was inches away from losing, but he got some really good luck. Now, obviously, I don't necessarily believe that you should blame luck for losses or attribute your success to luck. You should own your success and own your losses. So, obviously, he put himself in positions where if he got lucky, it would result in a win, which is the smart thing to do. However, it's worth noting that if one person wins a tournament using Forge Fiends and Mauler Fiends, that doesn't mean that Forge Fiends and Mauler Fiends are particularly competitively viable. It just means that we have one piece of data that suggests that they're really strong. And I would be hesitant to run out and buy Forge Fiends and Mauler Fiends at this stage based off of that trend. I would want to wait until we see multiple people putting up those wins, or some deep diving on the specific tricks that people can do with those units that get the value. Because from where I'm sitting and from what I can see, there's better units. So I would rather a unit of Exalted 8-bound over a Mauler Fiend, and I would rather a unit of regular 8-bound over a Forge Fiend in almost every conceptualization of the list. So that's not to say that they're bad, and obviously if you want to run them, go nuts. But I think that the fact that it's really important to note with all of these sorts of conversations is it depends on what type of terrain that you're playing on. If you're playing on like WTC style dense tables that have a lot of ruins, the Forge Fiends are going to really struggle to get those firing lines. They're not going to be able to shoot. People are going to run through the terrain, they're going to charge you from outside of line of sight, they're going to tag you, and you're never going to be shooting those blast weapons, right? Whereas if you're playing on like the Games Workshop terrain layouts that are a lot more open, maybe you are going to get some shooting in. So make sure it's worth noting that what works for one isn't always going to work for everybody, and it all depends on the terrain layout. Well, not all, but a lot of it depends on the terrain layout. And I play predominantly WTC maps, and on the WTC maps, I feel that the Forge Fiends are way too limited, and the same applies for Mauler Fiends, because Mauler Fiends can't run through walls, so your opponent can play funny buggers with you, where they just go, cool, my units are all just outside of 1 inch of the wall, and your Forge Fiend has to go all the way around in order to get a charge. So what could be a 2-inch charge for Exalted 8-bound becomes a 10-inch charge for a Forge Fiend, right? Or a Mauler Fiend, sorry. And as a result, they're just super awkward to play, super awkward to maneuver, and therefore I think they hold very limited value. Now, you could get away with one Forge Fiend or one Mauler Fiend in Deep Strike. I think the Forge Fiend in Deep Strike is really interesting, or Strategic Reserves, because he can come on from a table edge, which means he's much more likely to get the shooting lines, because if your opponent blocks you out here, you just come on over there, and therefore you can bring it in from reserves and shoot something. And a single Mauler Fiend for a rapid ingress is also interesting, because again, if your opponent moves onto a ruin over here, you can just rapid ingress over there so that you're charging in from behind the ruin instead of having to charge through the ruin. Right, so there is a world where you could take one of each, but I would probably advise against any more than one of each. And I think if you're looking for answers to 3 wound models, regular 8-bound your thing, and if you're looking for just a big scary monster in combat, I think that regular so the Exalted 8-bound are our best option there. The Maul Fiends do provide something interesting in that if the opponent has a lot of neg 1 to hit, sorry, not neg 1 to hit, neg 1 damage stuff, Maul Fiends don't give a fuck. They just go and they smash. So that's a worthwhile consideration as well. So it all really does depend on what your local meta is and what sort of opponents you're expecting to face. If you've got a mate that keeps running neg 1 damage stuff and keeps tabling you, well, maybe it's time to invest in a Mauler Fiend. The Forge Fiends also, interestingly, they do have that rule where if they shoot something, that thing has to take a Battleshock test, which is something that often isn't going to matter, but when it does, it can be game-changing. So I played a game with them recently, testing out Forge Fiends, because, like you said, it's a bit of a trend developing at the moment. So I was like, cool, I could fuck with this. I'm gonna test them out and see what I think. And I was playing against Thousand Suns player, and I shot the Forge Fiends into his Terminator unit, which killed a bunch of them, which was really good because the 3 damage kills those Terminators quite well. But the real interesting part was that I Battleshocked them, which then meant I could throw in a unit of Exalted 8-bound into them, and a unit of Exalted 8-bound into a Rubric Marine, and then I could fight into the Rubric Marine first, because my opponent was Battleshocked with the Terminator, so he couldn't spend a CP on them to interrupt. Whereas if he wasn't Battleshocked, I wouldn't have been able to pull off both of those charges, because if I fought into the Terminators first, he would spend the command points, and Ahriman's unit would probably kill most of those 8-bound. But if I fought with those into Ahriman's first, then he would spend the CP to interrupt with the Terminators. So the fact that I'd been able to Battleshock him in the shooting phase meant that I could go in the charge phase and do heavy damage. So that was really interesting and worth noting. So the Battleshock ability on the Forge Fiends it can be game winning, but it's also it's relatively unreliable, right? Like most things have like, leadership 5 or 6, so it's like you're not often gonna Battleshock people. And as the World Leaders don't have any ability to impact your opponent's leadership value, then it's really hard to successfully Battleshock someone. And unless you want to take multiple Forge Fiends and fire at them multiple times to try to do it, which, chances are if you're shooting something multiple times with Forge Fiends, the goal should be to kill it, not to Battleshock it. So, yeah, I don't know, it seems odd to me, and I don't think the Forge Fiends were that great. What else we got in here? Comments-wise, Mauler Fiends. Angron do enough versus the neg 1 weapon skill and neg 1 to hit from Death Guard, Contagions, and Nurglings. So I think he does, and I think it's mainly on the 8-bound, because you can go hitting on 2s, and then they go making you hitting on 4s, because they're neg 2, effectively. But then you go, well, I'm re-rolling hits anyway, so hitting on 4s with re-rolls is still 75% hit rate, which is actually pretty good. Somebody commented in there saying that the Death Guard are better off taking the neg 1 save. I disagree. I think most of the damage that's coming into the World Eaters is going to be AP2 anyway, like whether it be the Power Fists on the Plague Marines, or whether it be the Scythes on the Death Shrouds and stuff. It's like a lot of AP2 weaponry, and that's going to push 8-bound to their invulnerable saves anyway. So taking the Contagion that puts neg 1 saves, not super important. It's going to be pushing Angron to his invulnerable save with the AP2. World Eaters don't have Armor of Contempt or anything like that, so I think that the neg 1 save is not necessarily that relevant. It is obviously very good on the flamethrowers that they have, the flamers being able to overwatch and that sort of stuff. So there is an argument for it in that regard. But the World Eaters player can just make sure that they're out of your line of sight when they're charging, or outside of your contagion range when charging, so that you don't get that buff. I don't know. Every time I verse a Death Guard player, I'm terrified that they're going to take the neg 1 to hit and pair it with the Nurglings and make it so that my Berserkers just do nothing. And the fact that you're able to do that means that if I charge you with Berserkers that are now hitting you on 5s with rerolls, like, that's a yikes. They're going to do almost no damage. And then you're going to be able to fight with your whole unit and kill. But the fact that I do little damage to you means that you're going to have more of your unit left alive, which means the damage that you do back to me is higher. So I don't think you need to neg my saves in order to pull off that increased damage output, but you do need to neg my hit roll in order to increase your survivability and hurt my damage output, if that makes sense. So I would advise the Death Guard players in playing into the World Eaters to pick the Neg 1 to hit. And it's also guaranteed value because, like, I'm going to be charging you and I'm going to be trying to hit you, right? And when I charge you, I'm in contagion range because I'm in combat with you, right? So being Neg 1 to hit, it's guaranteed value. Whereas the Neg 1 save, it's like there's plenty of examples that I just gave where you're pushing me into my invulnerable save anyway, so that you don't get value there. And then there's other times where I'm like charging from out of line of sight, so therefore you don't get to overwatch me, or you know, I'm charging from outside of your contagion range early in the game, so it's like, well, you're not getting your contagions on those flamethrowers anyway. So yeah, to me it's pretty straightforward. That being said, I know some pretty competent Death Guard players who are adamant that I'm wrong. So, and we've got players in this chat that are Death Guard players who also think I'm wrong. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I am though, and I think that the Death Guard players often have like their sort of... I think a lot of players do this. It's not fair to say this about Death Guard players, but they have sort of their standard playbook. You know, their standard playbook is, I take the contagion thingy that Neg 1's my opponent saves, I move up to them and I flamethrower them dead, right? And then if they try to charge me, I fight first and I punch them dead, right? That's their standard playbook. And then, because that has worked for them, you know, in lots of matchups, hell, it might even work for them in the World Eaters matchup, but because that's worked for them, they're hesitant to change, even though another playbook might work even better. And I think that I think making the World Eaters Neg 1 to hit, same goes for things like Sisters of Battle, you know, or Drakari, or any sort of combat-based army. If you can go, cool, there's a Nurgling inside this Plague Marine unit, you know, the World Eaters, the Drakari, the Sisters, they don't have the guns to shoot them out, so therefore they have to charge, and then as a result they're within 6 inches of the Nurglings when they fight, so they are Neg 2. That just absolutely stops them dead in their tracks. Not to mention, if you can take out Angron, which, granted, very hard for Death Guard to do, depending on the list, of course. But if you can take out Angron, or you know, charge something that's nowhere near Angron, and make something Neg 2 to hit there, well, now that unit of Comp Berserkers is hitting on 5s with no rerolls, it's doing fuck all. So, yeah, to answer your question, yes, the Death Guard is a very hard matchup for the World Eaters. It's one that I definitely do not look forward to playing, and it should be interesting. So, let's see, what other questions did I have up here? Making a list without Angron in it. Now that's interesting. So I'm a big fan of trying to plan for potential nerfs. So getting yourself emotionally and mentally prepared for a nerf so that when it does come, you can rapidly pivot. I'm expecting Angron's nerfs to come pretty hard. I expect him to go up to like 450 points or something like that, and potentially, you know, some changes to the rules that might make him much harder to play. So I've been looking into lists that don't have Angron, and I think the main thing that you need if you don't have Angron is you need to lean heavily into the Exalted 8-bound because they hit on 2s, so they don't require his rerolls, and Lord Invocatus, and that gives them the scout moves. So basically it would be like 3 big 6-man Exalted 8-bound bricks, one of them in strat reserves for rapid ingress, 2 of them to gain the scout move from Lord Invocatus. Then you'd probably want a bunch of regular 8-bound as well, so that they can provide the reroll 1s to wound aura to those 8-bound. And even though you're going to get fewer hits because you don't have the access to reroll hits, and you're going to struggle into things that are neg 1 damage, you're going to have lots of volume in your attacks. And you're going to be hitting on 2s into most things, so you're not going to really need the rerolls. You're going to have high volume of attacks, which means high volume of hits. And then you're going to have to do your damage that way. The other thing that you would do in that situation is, because you're going to have tons of points, because 415 points or whatever Angron is pretty expensive. So being able to swap him out maybe for a couple of Mauler Fiends. Mauler Fiends are really interesting in that if the target has taken any damage, you can get neg 1, +1 to hit, so you're hitting on 2s, and they're going in doing, you know, the big D6. I think it's D6 +1 or D6 +2 damage on them as well. So the Forge Fiend, the Mauler Fiends, They fill a similar damage dealing capacity to Angron. They just don't have the fly, the resurrection, the auras, all of the other stuff that Angron brings, which is the reason he's as expensive as he is. So, yeah, I quite like that list, and I think the interesting thing about that list is because you don't have Angron, you're not relying on his auras, it's able to spread out a lot more, whereas you'll often find with World Eaters is everything wants to be near Angron, everything wants his auras, everything wants to be able to have him heroic intervene to protect them, or whatever. So everything wants to be near Angron, whereas when you remove Angron from the list, you realize, oh wow, I can actually have everything running around operating independently. I also think in that list you probably want a unit of 10 Berserkers with Khan in it, just so that you do have something that has some rerolls, so that if you do go into something like Death Guard where they're neg2 to hit, you're like, okay, well it's not the end of the world. But yeah, that would be my advice for an Angron-less World Eaters. You definitely don't want any Helldrakes. They're rubbish. Yeah, I think that list has actually got a lot of legs as well, because you could run Demon Princes in there as well, which is kind of interesting. So the Demon Prince is pretty expensive, but if you run multiple Mauler Fiends, multiple Forge Fiends, you can kind of function like a Chaos Knights army, where you're like, cool, I got a whole bunch of monsters, they're all toughness 10, they've all got good armor saves, they're hard to kill, and sort of stat check your opponent, where you're just like, cool, can you kill 6 or 7 toughness 10 monsters? If you can't kill them all, then they're going to hit you hard and kill you. And then what you can do as the World Eaters player is you go, what are the 1 or 2 things in their army that are really good at killing toughness 10 monsters? And then you can go in and kill them. So that's really effective strategy. And the people will tell you that it's just a worse version of Chaos Knights. They're wrong though, because it's just different. Like, for example, we have a stratagem that allows us to sticky an objective when we die. They don't have that. We have the ability to advance and charge on our Mauler Fiends. They don't have that on their Carnivals. Yes, they can go through walls, but if there's a straight line, we're much faster than them. We have the ability to inflict battle shocks into them in the shooting phase with our Forge Fiends. They don't have that. So there's lots of ways in which this is better. I would still probably argue that a Chaos Knights army is just overall is better, but we have a lot of really cool tricks going for us as well. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, I definitely think the mech heavy list without Angron works okay as well. Because it's that stat check, and the Demon Princes are really good. They're tough to kill. They've got the invulnerable saves, etc. So yeah, that's all interesting. So I've got from Inertia. Where'd that go? Sorry, from Inertia. Looking to start 40k, like the aggressive style of World Eaters, but my friends have been advised me against it as a first army. They are suggesting Custodians or Black Templars. Now, the one thing that I will say about World Eaters is they are a very unforgiving army. I somewhat agree with their advice as to not running them as a first army, because the problem with the World Eaters is if you make a mistake, your opponent's going to really punish you for it. Whereas that's not as true for something like Custodians. So because they're so much more durable, because they're so much more points efficient. You don't have to get so much out of each unit. I think they're probably right in that Black Templars or Custodians are probably more user friendly. That being said, I am also a massive advocate for playing something that you're passionate about. If you really enjoy the aesthetic of an army, you're going to want to play with it more often, and therefore you're going to get better at it. Whereas if you're playing something purely because it's what people have recommended that you play, you're not going to enjoy it as well. If it doesn't work, you're going to be tempted to blame them and just sort of give up because it wasn't your decision to run them anyway, so you're not particularly invested in the outcome. Whereas if you're like, no, I love World Eaters, I love the aggressive, fast, crazy combat, then I say do it, man. I say 100%. Don't worry about the haters. Run the World Eaters. and you'll have a ton of fun. I would argue it's probably the most fun army to play in 40k right now. It's so much fun to play. The fact that your opponent will be just absolutely terrified of your Alpha Strike and watching them hide is so satisfying. Before the game even starts, you can see your opponent just trying to figure out, like, where do I go? What am I going to do? He's going to charge me. He's going to kill everything. Like, it's so much fun. And then if your opponent doesn't, stop you, like if they don't deploy defensively, and then you go first, and you're like, okay, here we go. And you just go turn 1 charge with Angron, turn 1 charge with 8-bound, turn 1 charge with 8-bound, turn 1 charge with Exalted 8-bound over there, and you just blow up half their army in the first turn. It's so satisfying and so rewarding. So yeah, I think if World Eaters is something that you're interested in, just know that it's not an easy army to play. There's times where you have to play really conservatively. You have to make sure that every one of your units gets good value. That can be really hard to do. And also, combat can be quite a tricky and nuanced way to play the game. So you'll find, instances where your combat units are, there's a lot of pressure put on them to play the game properly. A lot of people get real sloppy in the combat area of the game, and that can be really hard on new players. So what else have we got here? Minoche saying, sorry to hear about your cat. Thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words. Oh yeah, hang on, sorry. Wasn't the Forge Fiend Morphine list an American player place, so you can design your own firing lines to an extent? Yeah, so player place terrain is probably the best for the Forge Fiend Morphine thing, because you can make sure that there's big open areas that you can run your Morphines through and that you can shoot your Forge Fiends through by clustering the terrain in one area of the table, so that you can go, cool, this side of the table is all free use. Or you can just make sure that you've got one piece here, one piece there, and there's a nice big channels between them. So yeah, player placed is very good for that. We've got Kyle Sargent. Hey mate, sorry to hear about your cat. Hoping for the best. Keep up the great content. Thank you very much, Kyle. I really do appreciate that. He's doing for just an update on this cat. So he's got liver cancer. I know this is obviously a 40k hobby chat, but for people interested, he's got liver cancer. He's doing quite well. It's basically, we've been told he's got weeks to months to live, but we've got him on this new experimental drug that's supposed to really slow the cancer and stop it from growing, because he's still acting and behaving like a normal cat. He's still running around. He sleeps on my face every night. He's still purring his head off. He's a happy boy. So there's this experimental drug that's really expensive, but it's supposed to slow the growth of the cancer or stop it from growing. And basically, if he's happy and healthy and not sick, so to speak, he'll have the cancer. It can't get rid of the cancer, but it stops it from taking over his body and causing illness, right? And they told us he had weeks to months to live about 2 months ago, and that's when we put him on these drugs, and he's still running around in the background right now. He's still a happy boy. So the drugs seem to be working very, very well, and that's really exciting. And we're just sort of taking every day with him as a bonus day that we might not have otherwise had. So yeah, it's really the medical science that they're doing these days is absolutely phenomenal, and the work that these vets have done is obviously very, very good and very appreciated. But yeah, it's like I said at the start, it's very expensive. So yeah, anyone who wants to throw us a couple bucks it's massively appreciated. Then we got Ben saying, Carnival moves 14, Morphine moves 10, advance and charge is 3.5, so CK is still faster in a straight line without auto advance or +2 move. That's correct. However, we do have access to +2 move, and we do have access to the auto advance. So in a straight line, there is situations where a Morphine can move 18 inches and then charge, because it's got the 10-inch move, +2 from the blessings, +6 from an auto advance. So you can move that distance. And the thing is when it's in your opponent's turn, you can say to them, this Mauler Fiend can move 18 inches and then charge. If I choose the right things, I'm going to be able to do that. So your opponent is going to have to stay outside of that 30 inches. Otherwise, they're going to risk you charging them, right? Because there's those variable factors. Whereas with a carnivore, they just go, oh, cool. So 14 plus 12, 28 inches, 26 inches. They just sit 26 inches away and go, cool, you can't get me. Whereas with the Mauler Fiend, you can tell them that you have that threat range. They'll deploy it outside of it, and then when it goes to your turn, well, you don't take the +2 move, and you don't use the auto advance because they deployed, that far away. So there's this big thing where having the ability to do something is sometimes more powerful than doing it. An example of this could be if you've got 2 CP in your pocket, and your opponent wants to charge you. They can't charge you in 2 places at once, because if they do, you're going to fight. They're going to fight, kill something. You're going to spend those 2 CP, interrupt, and kill the other thing, right? So as a result, they're not going to charge you, which means you never spend the 2 CP. But having the 2 CP, having the ability to do something, is sometimes more powerful than actually doing it. And the Mauler Fiend is an example of that, where it's like, okay, cool. I've deployed it in such a way that it's within range of that objective. That if I want to, I can go 12 inches with an auto 6 advance, go 18 inches, and then I can charge anything that goes on that objective. And now your opponent's going to be like, fuck, what do I do? Do I go on that objective or not? Right? So I agree that Carnivore's movement is better based on the fact that they can move through walls, but it is just worth noting that one thing that the Mauler Fiends do have is that capacity to go in a straight line very far. So I agree with your point that a lot of things have to happen in order for the Mauler Fiends to be faster. That is very true. However, it's one of those things where it's like if you have the capacity to do it, that's sometimes as good as doing it. So, food for thought. What else we got here? We've got Darth's Chaff. Been playing casual 500-point tournament against friends. Dark Angels, Custodians, Grey Knights, Black Templars. What is your opinion on this small 500-point list? I think that he's tried to comment it. Okay, cool. So we got DP on foot with the helmet. 2 Chaos Spawns, 1 Jackal, 1 Rhino. Might run into problems concerning damage output. Blood for the Blood God. I've just cut the shit out of my finger shaving down Terminator bits to use on my 8-bound. That's the best. You gotta love it when you're playing an army where cutting yourself and bleeding during the manufacturing of the army is like a good omen. Whereas most people, it's like they cut themselves and they're mad. Whereas I cut myself and I'm like, it's funny. I do that all the time when shaving bits off. What do we got? So DP on foot, 2 Chaos Spawns, a Jackal unit, and a Rhino. I would argue in a 500-point game, there's a few ways that you can play it. One of them is that you can just make it really, really hard for your opponent by taking Angron and a single unit of Jackals, right? And that's probably close to 500 points. And even though you're going to have very limited ability to score victory points, depends on the missions you're playing, etc. But at 500 points, nobody's killing Angron. Like, it takes way more than 500 points to kill Angron. So that could be one way if you wanted to try to, make a really strong 500-point list. Another thing that you could look into is multiple Mauler Fiends, because again, at 500 points, those big sort of tough things can be quite difficult to kill. There's a few other things worth considering, like what size boards are you playing on? If you're playing on smaller boards, then things like Berserker's Blood Surge move becomes a real big problem, because on big boards, your opponent can just go, cool, I'm just going to make sure everything is like 12 inches away from those Berserkers, and then they shoot you, and it doesn't matter if you Blood Surge 2 or 3 times, you probably don't make it into them. Whereas on a 500, if you've got a smaller board, because it's only 500 points, running like 2 units of Berserkers and like a Master of Executions and maybe a Rhino if you can fit it in there. That could be really good. The other one would be Lord Invocatus and a couple of units of Exalted 8-bound, or multiple units of just regular 8-bound, because again, on a small board, that scout move could be really, really powerful, because it might be able to just get them in combat turn 1 and just end the game real fast. So yeah, it really does depend on the type of terrain that you're using, the missions that you're using, and the size of the board as to what advice I would give for playing 500 points. But the general advice would be that tough things are really good in small games. Because in a big game, if you've got something really big and tough like a Lord of Skulls, if it's 2,000 points, your opponent can line up 2,000 points worth of shooting on that one 500 point unit and kill it, right? And it doesn't matter if that's the only thing they kill. The whole army can focus fire that down. Whereas in a 500 point game, they actually just can't do that. So a single Lord of Skulls is probably never going to die in a 500 point game. It's just going to spend 5 turns shooting that, charging that. Then next turn shooting that, charging that. And just be an absolute menace. So if you're playing 500 point games, the general rule of thumb is that tough units are better than hard hitting units, because they generally don't require aura buffs and things like that in order to hit hard, and therefore they fit better in a small lists. You could do something with like a couple of Demon Princes, because they're quite tough, but they also hit quite hard. Yeah, there's a few different ways that you could take a 500 point list. It's also worth noting, and I'll throw this out here at this stage, that if you want specific list advice outside of me just rambling on a stream, over on my Patreon, you can sign up for, I think the tier that gets you into the Discord is $10 a month. And in there you can post a list, and you can tag me in the post, and I'll chat to you about the list, and we'll write it together. And if you go for the higher tiers, I think it's the $30 tier is where we start doing like one-on-one coaching, and then the $100 tier is where we'll do phone calls one-on-one, and we'll chat, and we can talk about all sorts of stuff there. We can write your lists together. We can talk about what you've got, upcoming tournaments and stuff like that. We can tailor it for specific opponents if there's specific people that are giving you grief. So yeah, if you want any more detail on that sort of stuff, that's a great place to do it. And generally when I'm doing that, I'm not simultaneously painting a Helldrake and responding to a billion other people's comments. So if you want that sort of tailored approach, that's a really good way of doing it. Then we've got what's a good way to deal with Votann as a World Eater pilot? It's hard to say because it depends on what the Votann list contains. I've only played against Votann a handful of times, and I've never really had that much trouble. The things that have worked quite well for me into the Votann were the Khorne Berserkers and the Blood Surge move. So obviously it depends on the list, but the Votann, generally speaking, at least the versions that I versed, had lots of small units. So they had like a few of those tanks that put out a couple of shots. The Flan Fortress puts out a bunch of shots. But because they had multiple units, the Blood Surge move is really, really good, because it's going to take 3 or 4 of their units to kill the one unit of Khorne Berserkers. So the first one shoots you, and then you Blood Surge, and the next one shoots you, and then you Blood Surge. And generally you're going to tag a bunch of their stuff, and they're not going to be able to shoot you anymore. So the Blood Surge move was really, really good. But yeah, it really does depend on what's in their list as to what specific advice I would give. I would probably say most general advice for World Leaders would be applicable to the Votann game. Like, I don't feel like Votann have much in the way of like specific challenges that are unique for the World Leaders to solve. I think any solutions that you come up with against Votann will work against other things, and any tricks that you come up against other things will work against the Votann. So yeah, it depends on what's in your list as well. I'm a huge fan of the Berserkers. I think that they're one of those things where it's like, yeah, point for point, their damage output isn't great. Point for point, their durability isn't great. And even their abilities like Blood Surge move, you know, if your opponent's savvy and they work around it, there's certain situations where the Blood Surge move isn't great. But I think the Berserkers can create really, really interesting challenges for certain opponents. So having a unit of Berserkers in the list is really, really good. In the same way that Angron can be a really big problem. Sometimes Angron's just not great because he spends his whole time killing 30, 50 point units of just trash because your opponent keep putting him in the way. And as a result, you're just like, wow, there's this Primarch level guy going around doing bugger all. Or other times he goes into like a unit of Terminators and he goes, cool, 9 hits. They might have -1 to wound if you're over their toughness, so he goes back to wounding them on 4s, or 3s. Gets like 5 wounds, and then they have a 4-up invulnerable save, so he passes 3 of them. So cool, two wounds go through, so it kills 2 Terminators, and then the remaining 8 Terminators in that unit just smash him, right? So there's plenty of games where Angron's like, wow, he's really bad into big units, but he's also really bad into multiple small units. What's the point of Angron? But then there's also things where it's like, well, the point of Angron is that he's really hard to kill. And he's only going to kill 1 or 2 things. He's going to do that over and over and over. And I found that was the case when I played into Votann, was my opponent just looked at it and recognized early that he couldn't kill Angron. He just didn't have the tools. So he basically tried to ignore Angron. And then because he was ignoring Angron just ran around and just wrecked everything. Important thing to note when you're versing the Votann with Angron is to try to make it so that Angron touches 2 enemy units at once. He's got a relatively big base, so it's not that hard. If your opponent clusters up too close, instead of just going straight into the front unit, try and come around so that you can hit in between 2 units and get damage into both, because Angron is going to overkill anything he touches. So if you're able to go, cool, I'm going to put 5 of his attacks into this thing and 4 of them into that other thing and kill both, that's how you've got to play Angron versus the Votann or any other MSU style, army. What else have we got in here? Khan or Mo with nerfed glaive, and tips on squad size and overall thoughts on Berserkers. Alright, that's a really good question. I ummed and ahed about the Khan versus Berserker glaive Mo. Ultimately, I landed on the Berserker's glaive mainly because Khan does more damage than the Berserker glaive Mo. And also, Khan has more attacks and he provides reroll 1s to hit and wound to the unit. So he's way better for those purposes. However, being able to fight first is such a powerful psychological tool and such a powerful, obviously, ability in the game on a powerful combat unit like a unit of Khorne Berserkers. It pairs well with the Blood Surge move because you can Blood Surge into people and then fight them before they get to strike, which is really, really good. If you Blood Surge into somebody, often what they'll try to do is they'll go, oh shit, okay, I guess I'm going to have to charge that unit and dig myself out. But it's like, no, I've got fights first. Even if you charge me, I'm still going to fight before you, right? So that's really, really effective, and that's facilitated by fights first. It's also one of those things where you'll often find your opponent hesitant to charge you with things that they actually should. So one of the things that, and I'll share this trick with you guys, although this is a trick on how to beat World Leaders, but it's worth knowing, is that let's say you're playing a unit of Custodies, right? The Custodies player is going to be like, oh, there's a Mo in there with a glaive, that Berserker glaive. And it's got fights first, and it's sitting out in the open, so it's not on an objective. So the Grey Knight's like, I'm not going to get my reroll hits and wounds. I'm going to need my entire Custodies units to kill you. But if I charge you, you're going to fight first. You're going to kill half of my unit, and then I'm going to fail to kill you in return. So they're just stuck. They're like, what do I do? How do I fight that, right? And what they should be doing in that situation is charging in with 2 CP and then using their 2 CP to put -1 damage on them. And then all of a sudden that Master of Executions isn't killing multiple Custodies. The big chain axes in the unit aren't doing 2 damage each time they strike. And as a result, that unit of Custodies probably lives and then kills the Khorne Berserkers, even though the Khorne Berserkers fought first, right? So there's plenty of instances where people are scared of the Khorne Berserkers. They go, I can't charge it, so they position themselves to try to shoot it. and then they do a bunch of shooting damage, but then I'm blood surge moving, and it's just all bad. When in reality, they probably should have just charged it. This used to happen with a good example was the Chaos Space Marines Chosen, right? They'd be like, oh no, if my Chosen charge your Berserkers are just going to kill my Chosen before I fight. But what they didn't realize is if they charge in and use the Armor of Contempt strat to get neg 1 AP, now all of those Berserkers are AP 0, which means they get 3-up saves against all of my damage. That's really, really good. And as a result, that if they go in and do that, they're not going to kill... the Berserkers are not going to kill many Chosen, and then the Chosen are going to mince those Berserkers in return. But a lot of people, they view defensive stratagems like something that they use when you charge them. But being able to pair a defensive stratagem like Armor of Contempt or neg 1 damage in when you charge is really, really good. Anyway, to sort of... I've just got a fucking... Whoa, Davo's got a fucking $80 $80 super chat. Thank you very much. And it says, how about you put that belly camera to work and lift up that t-shirt, get up the solid work and representing Vic. G down, Dave. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. That being said, if you want to see my belly, you know what? With a donation like that, I'll do you a private show. This is a mate of mine from Geelong, which is a couple of hours out of Melbourne, who we catch up with on the regular. So I'll have to give him a private show. I don't want your $70 donation going towards all these other people on the internet enjoying a belly show. That being said, this camera here, this one, is kind of dumb, right? I thought I'm going to be painting, right? So I'm like, I'll put some cameras around so that you can sort of see what I'm painting. But because I'm holding it up here where my hands are, this camera's dumb. This one's also kind of dumb. Anyway, this is the joys of watching me figure out how to do live streams without really putting in the requisite effort to learn how to operate technology and what's the best way to set up your stream. But yeah, thanks, Dave. I really do appreciate that. And welcome to the chat. What else have we got here? We're talking about Berserkers, squad size, and overall thoughts. So I think Berserkers are a minimum 10. Like, yes, you can take a squad of 5, and I do see people do it. However, I feel like the main advantage of the Khorne Berserkers, the only reason that I think they're worth taking, is because of the Blood Surge move. For 100 points, a unit of 5, it just doesn't do enough. I think if you're going to be spending 100 points, you're better off finding a way to get extra points to turn that unit into an 8-bound unit. I just think the units of 5 don't do anywhere near enough damage. So I think when you make them a unit of 10, well, now it's like you get a lot of value out of spending the +1 to wound stratagem on them. They're actually going to kill things. But importantly, the Blood Surge move becomes a real weapon when you've got 10 men. Because if you've only got 5, they might line up like a Gladiator Reaper or something like that, or whatever the one with the chain cannons on it does, or they might line up a Brigand or some kind of Dakar unit, and they go, cool, I'm going to shoot that, and I'm probably going to kill 3 or 4 of them, right? And those remaining 2, if they Blood Surge move into me, I don't really care, 'cause it's 2 Berserkers. But if you go, well, there's a unit of 10, so if you're going to kill 3 or 4, and now 7 of them Blood Surge into you, that's a huge problem. So the Blood Surge move only really matters when they're a 10-man. It's not really relevant on the 5-mans. And as a result, I just think that Berserkers, they have to be taken in a 10-man. You also get way more value out of the fights first on a 10-man, or if you put Khan in the unit and you get the reroll 1s to hit and wound, getting that across all 10 Berserkers is really, really good. I guess the only time that you might consider running a 5-man is to put Khan in it, because now you're not banking on the Blood Surge move and you're not banking on the fights first. You're just taking that unit so that it goes in and it it might be a rapid ingress and it comes on from the table, and those 5 Berserkers just put some ablative wounds on Khan, so that if your opponent overwatches you or something like that, they're not going to kill Khan. Then Khan goes in, and it also means that Khan gets the reroll 1s to hit and wound on his own attacks because he's attached to a unit. So I guess that's the only time that I would consider taking a unit of 5, is a unit of 5 with Khan the Betrayer. All other times, whether it be... Well, realistically, the only other time is to take him with the Master of Executions, and you take him as unit of 10. I don't think you ever take 5 with no characters, and I don't think you ever take 10 with Khan, unless you're doing like what I'm doing with this list, which I talked about at the start, where I've got Khan and 2 Master Executions, and I can attach in whichever one is more suitable for the matchup, which is a really powerful like strategy where you go, cool, I've got, if I need fights first, I put in the Master Executions. If I don't need fights first, I put in Khan. That's really powerful, and that's what this list is sort of designed to do. So if you're doing that, that's the other way to sort of run Khorne Berserkers. So you could run, for example, you could run a single unit of 10 with Khan and a Master of Executions, and then put whichever one of them is more relevant for the matchup in, and then you put all 12 of those bodies in a Rhino, and that way, if you've got Khan in the Rhino on his own, and then the Master Execution attached to the unit, you can send Khan out to deal with something small, or you can send out the Berserker. So it means that that Rhino essentially has 2 bullets loaded in it that it can send out to do damage. But yeah, Berserkers are very, very interesting. I think they're overcosted, and I would love to see them go down a little bit in points. I would also love to see if when we get a Codex, I know our current detachment gives them +1 strength and +1 attack, but even with that, I don't think they do enough damage. They're not representative of what I like to think of Khorne Berserkers, right? Like you see Repentia running around, and it's like it's a little skinny girl with a chain glaive that's about the same size as a chain axe. You know, like, why is she doing 2 damage, but all my Berserkers are only doing 1? Why is she AP 2, but my Berserkers are only AP 1? You know, why does she get reroll wounds, but my Berserkers don't? Like, there's a lot of disparity between what I would expect the damage output of a certain unit to be, and Berserkers kind of just feel like assault intercessors. And it's like, but they're not. They're Khorne Berserkers. They're an elite's choice in most codexes, right? In the history of the codexes, right? They're supposed to be really scary, right? And I just don't feel that they are that at this stage. I think they're currently functioning more like Eldar in the way that they're a tricky unit. Like they have fights first, and they have the heroic interrupt and heroic intervention, and they've also got blood surge move, and they've got all these tricks. They're a very tricky unit, which isn't how I think World Eaters should play, and it's not like if you want to be true to the narrative, and it's not, I don't know. That's my sort of thoughts on Khorne Berserkers. I think when we get a new Codex, I think they all chain axes, the Berserker chain blades, they need to go to AP2. And now we're talking. And now they're interesting. And now they're scary, you know. Maybe they need a stratagem for +1 damage on their chain weapons, you know. Like, instead of having I would much rather, instead of a stratagem for -1 damage, I would much rather the stratagem for +1 damage. Because World Eaters, in my opinion, they shouldn't be trying to survive. They should be trying to kill. I would much rather go in and kill something and then die in return than go in, hit something, not kill it, but then use a stratagem to -1 damage so that when they fight back, they don't kill me and nobody's dying. That's not the way World Eaters, you know, that's not how I would imagine World Eaters playing. I imagine that's something that, you know, maybe Black Legion play like that, you know. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on the Berserkers. I really like the Berserkers. I have them in every list. I have written a ton of lists that I think are very good that don't have Berserkers in them, but to match my playstyle, I always end up circling back and going with the unit, with the armies that have the Khorne Berserkers in them, just because the Blood Surge move is just so good. It's such a cool trick, and it creates these situations where your opponent can't charge you, can't shoot you, and they kind of just have to let you have whatever objective you're on, because if they shoot you off it, you sticky it, and if they charge you, you fight first. and you've got lots of OC, so they can't really deal with you. So yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on Khorne Berserkers. I think they're kind of a Codex defining unit as well. They really do sort of define the faction. So it's important for them to be good. You know, I think there's certain factions out there where it's like, you know, like let's say the Space Marines, there's the ATV quad bike things. It's like nobody gives a shit if they're bad, right? Because they don't define the Space Marine Codex. Nobody thinks of them when they think of Space Marines, right? Same goes for like Eradicators. Like if Eradicators were bad, it's like, yeah, cool, we'll just bring Devastators, or we'll just bring something else. Like we've got so many options, so many things that define the faction. But like, if Rhinos and, you know, just a general Space Marine profile become bad, well then now that faction, because that's what defines the faction, it becomes bad. And I think that's sort of what World Eaters are with, or what Khorne Berserkers are with the World Eaters, is they're kind of a faction defining unit. They define the attitude of the faction, and if they become bad, well, it's sad times for the World Eaters. So I do actually kind of hope, though, and this is a tangent on a tangent on a tangent, but I guess that's what we tuned in for, right? I do hope that they make it so that Angron isn't a mandatory unit when we get a Codex. Because as much as I love running Angron, I've had a ton of fun with him. He's so fun, he's so scary, he's so powerful. It's kind of... I don't like that every army starts with Angron, you know? Every army has Angron, Lord Invocatus, and a bunch of 8-bound. And then there's just some stuff around the periphery that changes. You know, I would love to see more diversity within the faction. You know, like, let's make fucking Defilers great again, right? I'd like to see something interesting like that. That sort of, you know, mixes things up a bit. And if they made other things really good, that you might then look at Angron and be like, well, he's pretty expensive. Maybe I drop Angron out so that I can fit all of this other stuff. Whereas at the moment, it's like there's not really any other stuff that you want that you would replace for Angron. Especially because most of it just does kind of like what Angron does, but worse. Like you could drop Angron and nearly fit in 3 Mauler Fiends, right? And you're like, well, that's pretty interesting, right? 3 Mauler Fiends, that's a lot of combat attacks, but it's like, yeah, but now you've just replaced 1 combat monster with 3 combat monsters, but that 1 combat monster has fly, he has a 4-up invulnerable save, he has 2-up armor, he has more wounds, he can be resurrected, he gives an aura for reroll hits, he can give an aura for +1 charge. You know, he's a character, so he can use the heroic challenge to precision out enemy characters. Like, he does so many things that you just like, he's just like 3 Mauler Fiends strapped together and better. So I would like to see them make things that are different, that are interesting. And the Defiler is a good example of that, because the Defiler has some shooting attacks and some combat attacks. So 3 Defilers strapped together is actually a different beast than just Angron. Provides something functionally different. So I'd like to see that. I guess we could segue from here, unless anybody has any other... we've got Mohammed Carey, painting without thinning the paint, ? Yes. I kind of thin the paint a little bit, so what I do is I get some water on the brush there. Where's the camera at? There's the camera there. So generally what I'll do is I'll get a bit of water on the brush, and this triggers everybody that watches, and then I just dip it in the lid where the paint sort of pools after shaking, and then I just put it straight on. But then over time that dries out, and I often forget to add more water. But it depends on what I'm painting. If I'm painting something like when I painted like my 8-bound and stuff, I painted them with a lot of care, and I thinned the paints for those. But this is my 3rd Helldrake, and I don't know how many Helldrakes you've painted in your life, but they're fucking AIDS, and I hate every minute of it, which is why I'm so glad you guys are here to keep me company while I paint this fucking trim. but it's simply not worth thinning the paints when you're painting this much trim. And this Retributor armor paint is pretty good. It goes on pretty smooth. It's not, yeah, I'm not painting. It's not like I'm painting large panels where I need it to be non-gloggy and need it to be really smooth and blended well. It's like painting trim. You don't need to thin your paints for that. Don't listen to everybody that tells you that you have to always thin your paints all the time. It's like, no, you don't. It's really good if you're trying to achieve a blend, or if you're trying to achieve a subtle highlight, or if you're trying to achieve, smooth panel coverage or something like that. But if you're just trying to paint the infinite trim on a Helldrake, and if you thin your paints, it's going to take you 3 times as freaking long. And it already takes way too long. So, yeah. I'm a strong advocate for only thinning your paints when it's appropriate to do so, and ignoring all of the people who tell you that you must always do it. But I'm also far from a pro painter. I do have a ridiculous collection that I've painted myself. I know a lot of people have big collections, but they get a lot of it commission painted, or a lot of people have like one army. I've got like tons of stuff here, and all of it's been hand painted by me, and that's largely due to the fact that I've recognized that one of the best ways to get things done is to just lower your standards a little bit. Be reasonable, be like logical. Sometimes it's better to have things done than done well, because if you go, oh, I've got this standard where everything I do has to be really, really high quality painting, it's like, yeah, but then you will never finish an army, and you'll end up with boxes upon boxes of grey plastic, and you'll never finish an army, and therefore you'll never attend tournaments, you'll never play games, and then you'll end up falling out of the hobby. Whereas if you just go, oh, well, I'm just going to get it done for now, I'm just going to do it, it's not going to be pretty, but it's going to be finished, and then you're going to start playing with it, and then you're going to add a unit, and because you've got a finished army, when you add that one unit, you're more likely to spend a little bit more time on the quality of that added unit. So like my Berserkers, they're not fantastic. Most of them I painted like 15 years ago, and very rushed, no thinned paints, no quality at all. But when I added the 8-bound recently, I painted them well, right? So getting an army, of a foundation of an army that you can then add to, and then paying a little bit more attention to the models that you add, is also good advice. Or, for example, my first Helldrake I painted quite well. This Helldrake, I'm just desperately trying to get it done, because it's my third Helldrake, and the chances of me running a list that has 3 Helldrakes is quite low. Like, in order for Helldrakes to be good enough to justify running 3, they'd have to be like 80 points. Like, at their current rules, they're so bad. The fact that their OC is 0 and so expensive, like, they're just poo. So the chances of me running 3 is so low that I don't care if this one's finger painted. It's only going to be there in that, that one potential future that's very unlikely. Whereas the 8-bound, I put a lot of effort into them, because I'm like, I imagine they're going to probably be in every list for 2 years, because I really enjoy their playstyle, and they're a new model. Therefore, GW is very unlikely to nerf them into oblivion, because GW want to sell new models. They don't care as much about selling old models, as you can see with the Defiler. So they're likely to get solid rules support for a long time. They're going to be in every list, so therefore I'll put effort into painting them. And like I've won a few awards for painting. Most of them are like at competitive tournaments where I'm going up against other competitive players, so it's a lot easier to sort of win the painting awards in those places. But like I won one recently with my Lord of Skulls, because that was something new that I've added to the army, and because I'm adding them, I was able to paint them quite well. But yeah, so don't take this cringe effort of me throwing paint directly from the pot onto the model as an indication for the quality of the rest of the army. This is just because this Helldrake is, needs to be done. If you could also see how fucking messy I've been with this, you'd roll over, you'd be done, you'd turn the stream off, you'd be like, fuck this guy, he's just painting like trash. Trim is the cost of joining chaos. Could not agree more. It's actually interesting. So like I'm low key praying to the gods that Heldrakes are going to become OP, and part of the reason that I'm doing that is because nobody's going to want to fucking paint 3 of these things, right? It takes a maniac like me to paint 3 of these things. So even if Heldrakes got so good that running 3 Heldrakes was like the meta thing, I don't think anyone would do it, even if it was OP. So as a result, it wouldn't show up in win rates. It wouldn't show up in, like tournaments. It wouldn't become part of the meta. People would be like, oh, you got to look out for that World Eaters triple Helldrake list. And then they would be like, yeah, but nobody actually runs that. It's really powerful, but nobody actually does it. And then I'd be that crazy guy that actually does it and capitalizes on the fact that, you're getting turn 1 charges with 3 Helldrakes. Pretty crazy. If the Helldrakes, instead of having their Mortal Wounds ability, if they had the 8-bound, the Exalted 8-bounds ability of you can't fall back from them, then they'd be fucking sexy. That would be really cool. And it'll be really interesting. So one of the things that I think could pull Helldrakes into the mix is if we get a new Codex where that 8-bound ability to not fall back, if that becomes a stratagem that can be used on anything, well then you'd be like, yep, that Helldrake's moving into the middle of my opponent's army, making it so that none of that stuff can fall back. It's tagging one thing, and then I'm going to tag everything else with Berserkers and lock them all down. That would be very interesting. Alright, what do we got here? Nope. Frankly, my answer for Trim was to find a better metallic, thin paint that coats with only 1 pass, and I'm done. But that's exactly what I do with the Retributor. I actually think that the Retributor only requires 1 pass. It's a good paint. I like it. Cool. We've got ACRP, PRCA, a crap rapper, whatever. Your advice falls on deaf ears of a man green stuffing the 14th out of 16 completely converted 18. 8-bound, sorry. 14th of 18, 8-bound. Yeah, that's fair. I would love to see pictures. You can't post them in the YouTube comments, though. I'm always a big fan of converted 8-bound, so I don't know, maybe if you've got a Facebook post or something like that you can link, I'd love to see them. Or you can just PM me or DM me on Facebook and send them through. Because when the 8-bound first came out, I fell in love. I was like, these models are absolutely gorgeous. But I've also seen some really cool conversions that people use out of like Terminators and Possessed to make 8-bound that look really, really cool. So we've got Reminens. Hey, I've been playing Death Guard for quite a while now, and I want to get some movement. How would you recommend getting into World Eaters? Got Angron and a combat patrol sitting on my desk. How would I recommend getting into World Eaters? I think it's probably one of the easiest factions to get into right now, simply because we have a very well established meta list, right? Like Angron, 8-bound, Lord Invocatus, and maybe 1 unit of Berserkers. Almost everybody takes that, right? And then there's a few people that deviate with that last sort of 500 points. You can play whatever you want there. But the core of every World Leaders list competitively is more or less the same, which actually makes it a pretty good army to get into, because the chances are the models that you buy are going to be, popular and good. Because we have so few data sheets to play with, it's pretty easy to get into. So I would say you probably only need 1 unit of Jackals, you probably only need 1 unit of Berserkers, and then you just spend the rest of your points on 8-bound and characters, really. It's a pretty easy faction to run as well. Like, it can be really hard in that if you get caught slipping, if you get misposition or something like that, you can get punished pretty hard. But depending on your table, if you're playing on a WTC style table with lots of terrain, you just the key is reminding yourself to play conservatively. Just because you have all of the speed in the world and you can go anywhere you want and do whatever you want, doesn't mean you always should do that. And sometimes you've got to go, cool, these 8-bound could charge that, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to sit here out of line of sight, and I'm going to send those guys over there to charge, and I'm just going to wait, and I'm going to hold these 8-bound for the next turn. Whereas there's this thing where you go, cool, I could make 10 charges this turn, so you're really tempted to do it. But that often causes people to lose games because they overextend, they run out of pieces too early, and then they lose the game. One of the things about World Eaters is you'll almost always get tabled. Almost every game that I play, I get tabled. But you're generally pretty good at getting a really high score in the process. So that's one of the best pieces of advice that I'd give like an aspiring World Eaters player, somebody looking to get into the faction, is to look at the faction in that regard, so that you play cagey, safe games, play conservative, don't go too hard too fast. And I think that's all of the trim on this fucking Helldrake finished. I might do a little bit more down here actually. But we're very close. We're a very close team. I don't know how long this stream's been going for. An hour or so, I think. I don't know if it says it on the screen anywhere. No. Okay, we've got you run the standard 8-bound as shirtless, exalted 8-bound, get the total conversion treatment. So, hang on, I think I've missed a comment here. Yep. Akpra. I'm going to call you Abracadabra because I can't be fucked figuring out how to pronounce ACPR-PRCA. So going forward, you are Abracadabra. And Abracadabra says that he's aspiring to be the 120 Jackals list guy. So I've got 180 Jackals, which are converted out of old, what's it called? Age of Sigmar Blood Reavers, I think they were called. And I went through and rebased them all so they were on the 28mm bases that Jackals are on, put a bunch of them on 40mm and gave them bigger weapons to represent the Skull Smashers. So I went through and did all that. And then I played like 2 games with it, and I was like, this is trash. This was back when Desolation Marines were able to be taken in squads of 10, and they just blasted the whole unit away, even through the 4-up. This is back when the Demon Prince gave them a 4-up, and then they had a 5-up Finopane. They still just died, and it was really underwhelming. That being said, I think in today's meta, they would probably do fine. And also, into certain factions, they would be very toxic, right? There's certain armies would just be like, I can't kill that many fucking Jackals. So yeah, if you want to be that guy, be that guy. Don't let people guilt you out of running something that you think is powerful, because you're not going to be able to guilt them out of it. Like, I'm not sure whether you were saying that the whole that guy thing in this sense, but I know a lot of people, like, they'll look down on you if you bring 120 Jackals. They'll be like, oh, that guy. But they'll do that whilst bringing 2 Wraith Knights, or whilst bringing, whatever. Like, fuck that. Bring whatever you want to bring. It's a free country. Oh, Jesus. Sorry about that, guys. Some dust in this garage flicked up. But yeah, don't let people guilt you out of running something that you think is powerful. And I agree that the Jackals list is really funny. It's very funny and quite powerful. So by all means. Yeah. So I might wrap it up here. And because I know it's very late over there. I think somebody said it was midnight in the States at the moment. So I think most people are probably about ready for bed and probably sick of hearing my shit. And I've finished the trim on this Helldrake now. So the next stream will be painting, all of the little cables and all the metal, the bolt gun metal stuff. Painting all the horns and the spikes on him. Still a fair bit of work to go on him. But yeah, thanks heaps for tuning in, everyone, and thanks for everyone who chucked in the comments. I'll just do a quick look now just to make sure I haven't missed any other comments. Young folk here going to a 1500 point tournament soon, full of grown-ups. Any tips? No, just have fun, man. Like, I think most grown-ups, when they're playing with young people, they'll be very helpful. They'll guide you through it. No, they're not going to bully you or anything like that. I think most tournaments you'll find most people are really, really reasonable. So just go in there with an open mind and have fun. Abracadabra so likes the nickname. And then we've got Blood Reavers. Yep, I've done the same for mine. I only get 10 so far though. Yeah, so the Blood Reavers I've got. Let me see if I can get this on the camera. Which camera is best? This camera. So these are my Blood Reavers here. These are my Jackals. Maybe this one's better. No. Is that going to focus? No. But yeah, I've given them all chain swords because they've got Jackal chain blades. So I've just taken the Blood Reavers and I've just swapped the hands off for chain swords. And then this is my Skull Smasher guy, where I've given him like a big mace thingy. And then even though the stats for the model are the same, the Dishonored model is kind of a bit chunkier, a bit bigger, so I gave him a shield to sort of represent that, make him a bit chunkier. They've got the little, I don't know whether that shows up on the camera, maybe this camera's better. It's got the flamethrower backpack on, which is like the vials that are on the back of the Jackals. And yeah, that's my Skull Smasher guy, my Icon guy. Got a chain blade and an Icon. So yeah, they're the ones that I use for my Jackals. I do like the Jackals models released by Games Workshop, but when you've already got 100 and fucking, I think I got 180. I had 6 units of 30. So when you have that many, it's like I'm not buying and building and painting more. Like, it's just not happening. So yeah. What else have we got here? DJO Cossack. Hey Dean, with the new CSM Codex set to drop this year, do you think you'll take a break from World Eaters to play CSM? Your masterclass videos for the Sub-Legion in 9th were awesome. Yeah, thanks for the comment, and absolutely. So what I'm planning to do is, provided the CSM Codex is good, it doesn't have to be amazing, it doesn't have to be meta-breaking, it just has to be good. What I'll probably do is, between its release and the World Eaters Codex release, I'll play CSM, and then when the World Eaters Codex comes out, I'll play the World Eaters Codex for a while, and then I'll go back to chopping and changing between the two. That's probably what I'll do, because that way I'll be playing whatever's new, hot, exciting. I'll be coming up with ideas alongside you guys. I'll be working on different tricks and combos, and if there's truly going to be 8 detachments in that book, then I'll be able to do a breakdown of each detachment, which is going to be really fun. So there'll be a lot of content to work with, whereas I feel like for the last 12 months, I've kind of beaten the World Eaters drum to death, where it's like I've talked about World Eaters constantly. So I'm really looking forward to the Chaos Space Marine Codex coming out, and I will be pivoting onto that. Unless, of course, it's absolutely gutter trash. If it comes out and it's like, wow, there's just nothing good here, then competitively, I'll probably continue to play World Eaters, and for, casual games, pickup games, battle reports, that sort of stuff, that's when I'll pivot over onto the Chaos Space Marines. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to probably doing another one of these on Monday, depending on what time I end up getting up and what the plans are. I really enjoy these sort of things. It's a really good opportunity for me to get some painting done. If I was up there watching TV with the missus, I would not be painting this Helldrake. So thank you for helping me, and then thanks you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one. And also a huge thank you to everybody who donated via that super chat button. I think this video stays up live, so even though it won't be live, people can't comment, I can't comment back. If you do watch it, you can still comment, and I'll jump back in and check those comments after the video's been posted. So make sure you check that out, and as always, check out the website blogforbloodgod.com if you want to show your support. Get a shirt like this one here that you can see my fat belly in. And yeah, there's also objective markers, dice. There's all kinds of really cool stuff on that website that all goes towards helping me improve the quality of this channel, like this new microphone that I bought for this streaming purposes. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.